Sword of Coming Chapter 1095. Qin Pingon changed into a robe. The sky and the earth are white and the robes are bright red. The tall trees in the snow are extremely red. On the high side of the city, for some reason, Zhou figure shrunk down to that of an ordinary person. It wasn't until this moment that Ma Kuxuan knew that he had finally met the Lord, and he was quite surprised. When did Qin Pingon enter the ancestral hall and he was sitting at the door before and he didn't notice it? Ma Kuxuan thought he didn't underestimate Qin Pingan's morality. He did not hesitate to take risks, violated his wish and used the lightning magic power that he hated earlier, but in the end, Qin Pingon just used a clone to deal with him? Originally thought that moving out of this careful planning, even if Qin Pingon survived, he should lose his morality, and the immortal who had just joined would fall back to Yupu. Ma Kuxuan asked in his heart, what happened to releasing Qin Pingan's heart demon? What if he sees it through? Just strike while the iron is hot. This guy has been fighting for a long time and has a lot of eyes, but don't be fooled. He fooled it. This is the reason why Ma Kuxuan was in the big formation before but didn't mind it. You Qin Pingon took the lead, but you didn't know that the mantis stalked the cicada and the oriole and wanted to overwhelm the leader. It's not that simple. Logically speaking, the inner demons of cultivators are most abundant when they are at the bottleneck of the nascent soul realm, and when they are retreating to enter the upper 5 realms, because this is the only way for ancient Daoists to cross this barrier. As long as Zhou uses some long-lost ancient magical powers to open the cage of the mind and release Qin Ping's inner demons, then this formation that separates the world and helps Qin Pingon gain a favorable location will become his way to face the inner demons. The biggest difficulty is that the world here is more spotless, and the demons are more innocent, and the demons that Qin Pingon faces will be more like Qin Pingon himself. At that time the Tao will be 1 foot taller and the devil will be 10 feet taller. At that time Qin Pingon will have to face, besides Ma Kuxuan, the imaginary counterfeit Zhou, plus the inner demon Qin Pingon. There will be 3 immortals. Zhou smiled and replied, it's not that I can't let it go, but it's unnecessary. Qin Pingan's demons are very weird. To us they have no killing power at all and are meaningless. Demon from the beginning to the end, it is just watching the show on the wall. Ma Kuxuan couldn't help scolding his mother. I just said this guy is a monster. Zhou said, my existence makes him jealous. From this, it can be seen that my real body makes him have an unusually deep memory. Ma Kuxuan said casually, how many people are there worthy of Cui Qin and Qi Jingchun joining forces to fight against the enemy? After that, invite the ancestors of the 3 religions to join forces to suppress them? For thousands of years, there is only one person. With a wave of Ma Kuxuan's hand, those remaining Daoist intentions of the 5 thunders scattered in the heaven and earth, if ordered, will gather at the head of the city, pull up colorful silk threads and chop countless snowflakes. Qin Ping didn't stop him and let Ma Kuxuan pick it up. Zhou shook his head. Anyway, the road is broken, so there's no need to take it back. Wait until you win him. Be careful not to taint the sword intent, or you will lure wolves into the house. Ma Kuxuan only listened to half of it, but still did not withdraw the decree, but gave up the idea of keeping it in his sleeve. Tens of thousands of colored threads gather at Ma Kuxuan's side, condensing into a knot-sized ball. The outliner. Ordinary people don't know the difference between immortality and supernatural powers, and they all regard them as methods on the mountain, which means they don't know the difference between gods and immortals. Tracing back to the source, we only talk about the roots of the Tao. In the strict sense, thousands of spells and tricks of the immortal family are all the veins created by the ancient Qi refiners who sought the Tao individually, purpose and then manifest it to the outside world. Supernatural powers are obtained from the many powers of ancient gods. Ancient Daoists or engraved purple books recorded those paths in the book. This is the origin of some secret books of Taoism in later generations. The traces of the brand marks were directly moved and engraved on their own muscles and bones, the gate of the natal Qi mansion and the walls, just like a list of cliff carvings or inscriptions on the wall. They inherited a part of the legacy of their predecessors, which became the foundation of their enlightenment and the opportunity to enter the mountain. This is the reason why later generations pay attention to whether a person has immortal roots and whether he is a Taoist weapon or not. There are also ancient Taoist priests with extraordinary talents who can use it directly. As their Taoism gradually deepens, they can improve it and change their appearance a little so that they can better adapt to that brand new world. If we talk about how to perform it, we only talk about one kind of supernatural power, and the purpose is in the word tong, supernatural power. A divine way runs through the world, which is why later Taoists built altars which imitated supernatural powers, Taoist priests granting a talisman, annotating the name of the immortal. You can borrow the law with the ancestor master. This method needs to pave a way. Without hindrance, this is the meaning of Taoist granting talismans. What's more, the incarnation outside the body that spreads out, the golden body and Dharma image that follow the sky and the earth, are all learned by Qi practitioners from the sky and used on the earth. So this is also why Zhou said that the road is broken, because Ma Kuxuan is now in the realm of immortals, and it is impossible to build a second bridge in a short time. What's more, Ma Kuxuan and the Ministry of Lei borrowed this heavenly tribulation thunderpond. They were already suspected of being guarded and stolen. It is the price that the imaginary enemy of immortal realm must pay. Fortunately, he has always been the kind of person who does things based on his mood and preferences and ignores his head. Ma Kuxuan asked in his heart, "How is the progress of dismantling the formation?" Zhou said calmly, "Very slowly, far below expectations. His flying sword rank is not low. Besides, we must prevent it from arousing the enemy." Ma Kuxuan said helplessly, "I have been repeatedly taught by this guy to fight. It's best not to quarrel. Of course you don't care. No matter how thick-skinned I am, I won't be good at it." Zhou turned a deaf ear with one hand behind his back and the other clenched a fist across his abdomen, holding two chess pieces in his palm, rubbing them lightly, creaking, not staring at Qin Pingan but staring at that piece of skin which has now become a piece of immortality. It is destined to be a magic robe that has never been seen before or since. A fairy weapon bearing the real name of the monster clan is indeed very interesting. Even if Qin Pingan gave it to a cultivator in the Ascension realm, the other party would not dare to wear it. Zhou seemed to be explaining the origin of Qin Pingan's real body to Ma Kuxuan. There are only two possibilities to hide the way of this instant attack from you. One, he is beheading the culprit, destroying Yueshan, the city. The inscription on the head after returning to Hauran actually did not return Lu Chen's cultivation base, but stayed in the 14 false realms, 2 realms higher than yours, and borrowed Lu Chen's mixed Taoism. Second, Fei Jian's natal supernatural powers can not only isolate the world, but also can do whatever he wants, start a new stove and recreate the world. Xianxia, is there something wrong? Qin Pingan stretched out an arm with a smile and spread his palms, indicating to continue. For a cultivator, the feeling of being beheaded with the 3 flowers of the Tiangong on his head and forcibly dissipating his merits with external force is not good. Qin Pingan had to behead me to get out of trouble. He really needed to rest for a while. Fortunately, the beheaded things do not flow to outsiders anyway. They are still scattered in this cage and they can be taken back sooner or later. Be sure to give a level assessment, which is roughly equivalent to being half-punched by an 11th level martial artist. Ma Kuxuan wanted to delay time for Zhou so that he could break the barrier between heaven and earth. Qin Pingan also needed a breath of pure qi and secretly changed some layouts temporarily, each taking what he needed. In this fight where no one knows the details of the other side for the time being, neither side can make a wrong move. Everyone wants to get rid of the other party. Ma Kuxuan is unwilling to follow the path of God, and Qin Pingan certainly does not accept the fall. But both sides have an intuition that at a certain moment just one click life and death can be decided. Or some magical power of Ma Kuxuan, or a certain fist or sword of Qin Pingan. Zhou said, in this way he has at least 2 natal flying swords. Together with the world, build a framework, set boundaries, invite the king into the urn, and the host invites a fine wine or a toast. It depends on the mood. Together, all things rely on a golden essence. The long river of time created by copper coins allows him to arrange freely on both sides of the bank. The 2 flying swords and the 2 supernatural powers can be described as seamless when matched together. It is equivalent to a saint of the 3 religions carrying a dojo that could not be migrated. Comparing the 2, those who are inferior can't raise a realm, and the advantage is that from ancient times to the present all directions are in this realm. Ma Kuxuan was very troubled, frowned and said, can't it be a natal flying sword with several supernatural powers? Zhou smiled knowingly. Forget about the 10 young people in the world that Zhou raided? You are not surprised why only Shanzhe Yexiu and Jianxiu Lukai, who were born out of nowhere, were deliberately pointed out by Zhou. The name, root and foot of Fei Jian? Even the 2 young Jian gourds owned by Lukai? It is clear that Zhou Xian meant something just like a letter telling the world, so there is no need to hand over the letter to someone got it. Lu Guan is the only genius who made it to the list at the Jindan stage. On the other hand, the last hermit official Xianxia who was at the bottom of the list was able to rank here because he was both a swordsman at the nascent soul stage and a warrior at the Yufeng stage. Bro. If my guess is correct, the flying sword Bai Luo that is warmly nourished in the Yangjian Gord's mind, the sword suddenly hits the poor Bai Luo, it must be deliberately targeted at Xianxian. Zhou raised his hand and rolled up his sleeves. This is a vast world. Let the sky be as high as the earth and the earth as wide as you want, the yin and yang are in harmony, and the avenues circulate here in an orderly manner. Sword repair can break 10,000 spells with one sword, and Lu Guan can break 10,000 with one sword. The sword, ascending to the poor and falling to the underworld, and the cages and barriers have become false. Another sword-raising gourd of Daoist ancestor immediately, Lu Kai used it to refine the sword White Horse, which happened to defeat the long river of time between heaven and earth. In short, two swords restrain two swords just happened to be extremely hard work. Qin Ping clapped his palms and said with a smile, "It's amazing. Although it's a fake, it's still far from the next level authentic one, so it's not too clumsy." Ma Kuxuan said, "Don't forget that you are the one at the bottom and you can still be so happy." Qin Ping smiled and said, "I am the bottom of the 10 young people in the world, so you are the top 10 young people in Aquarius Island. Are you happy?" Ma Kuxuan twitched the corner of his mouth. Qin Ping said, "Could it be that Zhou Zi greeted you in private when he made the list, and you thought you would rather be a chicken head than a phoenix tail, so you gave me the bottom position?" Ma Kuxuan stretched out his hands and rubbed his cheeks, then grinned and said, "Sometimes you cry." Qin Ping smiled and said, "Ma Kuxuan, you have a bad habit brought from your mother's womb, that is, you don't want to see others good and you want to overwhelm others with everything. And you only do things that you think you can do well. Kuxian, this is not good, you have to change. Of course, the premise is that you still have a chance to reform yourself." Ma Kuxuan was very disgusted by the sentence Kuxuan. Zhou glanced at the bright red in the snow. Ma Kuxuan sneered. The old scholar's deadly enemy said that being a good teacher is a serious problem for people. "I heard that you are not satisfied with reasoning, so why don't you just go to the village and become a teacher?" Qin Ping said, "I think there are two major problems with human beings. Apart from being good at being a teacher taught by the sages, there is another problem, that is, being ashamed of being a disciple." Ma Kuxuan was speechless for a moment. Qin Ping took a deep breath. "Doesn't it seem unfeasible to choose to do all the work in one battle?" Zhou ignored the bickering between the two fellow villagers and the same age and said to himself, "The world mistakenly thinks that Lu Kai's appearance from an unknown swordsman to one of the top 10 young people in the world is due to destiny." Sheng, following the trend, was favored by heaven and earth and felt that heaven did not want Ningyao to be more beautiful than before. Just like among the younger generation, there was Chao Ci first on the road of martial arts, followed by Qin Jianxian. It seems that the way of swords should be the same. Only when Lu Kai was compared with Ningyao, he felt that Lu Kai, after 100 years of sword practice, had a chance to compete with Ningyao at the same stage of swordsmanship. No one expected that Lu Kai, a sword cultivator, would truly the one to deal with is not Ningyao but Qin Jianxian. Ma Kuxuan's mind is unusual. Instead of gloating, he regrets why he doesn't have such an old enemy. Of course, Qin Ping is also considered an old enemy, but Lu Kai, a swordsman, is the key winner that Zhou Zi tailor-made for Qin Ping, and the meaning is different. However, this kind of misjudgment that Lu Kai had a chance to wrestle with Ningyao in the sword way was reasonable at the time, because many people thought that Feishing City had migrated to the colorful world, and it was no longer luck in the way of swordsmanship. With the strong old sword spirit of the Great Wall, it is reasonable to say that Ningyao's breakthrough speed may indeed slow down. Every time she advances to a realm, the stagnation of the next realm will be longer. Then Lu Kai, who holds 2 Daoist ancestor-raising sword gourds, has the possibility of catching up. What are the facts? What else can I do? Naturally, I was belatedly aware and misunderstood Ningyao. It turns out that it doesn't make any difference whether she practices her sword at the Great Wall of Sword Qi or not. 10,000 years ago, the sword cultivators in the world were nothing more than Qin Qingdu and other sword cultivators other than Qin Qingdu, only these two kinds. Now Ningyao has shown signs and momentum to fill Qin Qingdu's vacancy. I just don't know if this heavenly pass from the Ascension realm to the 14th realm will stop her. Ma Kuxuan suddenly noticed that Qin Ping had a strange expression on his face. What's the matter? Let's hurry up. And when we talked about your Taoist partner Ningyao, I thought that I was a softie. Starting to feel bad? Now in Haoran, almost everyone knows the history of the ancestor who moved the mountain in Xinjiang Mountain, Lu Xianyang, and then forced Qin Pingon and Ningyao to join forces to fight against the enemy. The two sides fought for a long time, fought with Song Chongjing, and finally seemed to provoke Qi Jingchun, just because they wanted to move away the Beiwepiun mountain that now belongs to Yao Shinjun. But he didn't know that Ma Kuxuan had also provoked them alone back then. At that time Ma Kuxuan still thought very differently, but felt that the foreign girl and Nipping Lane were the dogs. If they had different identities they could get together. Very good, a flower stuck in cow dung, more interesting. Qin Ping shook his head and said with a smile, a dummy is a dummy. They're not real people after all. We can only find out based on pictures, not fantasies. Zhou Mi said, oh? I implore Qin Jianxian to enlighten me. Qin Pingon said, let me introduce the earliest names of my two natal flying swords, which are the Caged Sparrow and Jing Zhongyue. Correct you, Lu Kai's flying sword Baiju was originally used to target the Caged Sparrow. Feijian Biluo is aimed at Jing Zhongyue. Of course there is nothing wrong with your current judgment. I took bags of gold and copper coins and melted them into a long river of time. The creation of a small world is also due to the appearance of Lu Kai, and his two flying swords have given me a lot of inspiration. The implication is that knowing that Lu Kai is waiting for him on the road ahead, Qin Pingon not only did not detour, but went a step further. Doesn't your white horse ignore the constraints of the long river of time? Then I will do everything possible to collect gold and copper coins everywhere and keep throwing money away. Your Bai Luo claims to be able to break 10,000 swords with one sword? Then see how many 10,000 swords you can break. 100? Zhou Mi suddenly realized, I'm not afraid to embrace the Tao and die, but am willing to walk straight, so this is the sword cultivator. Ma Kuxuan clicked his tongue and said, the head is really hard. Zhou Mi showed admiration and said with a smile, it's a good habit to believe in fate but not to accept fate. Ma Kuxuan asked in his heart, how to say? Zhou Mi replied, it's a bit troublesome. It's not easy to get rid of the cocoon. I'm afraid there will be cocoons outside the cocoon. I can roughly infer that this place is one of the fantasy worlds. There are dozens of candidates. I have found the root of the cocoon so far. There are 32 of them, although their strength is definitely average, not as good as this great wall of sword chi, but it is not difficult for him to use them to get in the way at a critical moment and to destroy your attempt. Ma Kuxuan nodded. This guy has been thoughtful since he was a child. He is good at disguising and he is very cunning. In terms of the city, Song Jisun was not worthy of carrying shoes for this neighbor. He is worthy of being a fellow. I am pretending to be a fool and he is pretending. Good man, we all made it back then. Qin Pingon seemed to have guessed their intentions and with a slightly sarcastic tone he smiled and said, it's useless to give you a chance. Zhou Mi suddenly said in his heart, be careful. Ma Kuxuan sneered and said, small heart, you continue to crack the barrier, it is best to smash it completely in one go. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. I'm not used to him anyway. In an instant the heavens and the earth changed their forms, the sky was blue and beautiful and there was not a single snowflake. The earth that was originally covered with snow was not white in an instant. At the same time above the top of the city, a line cut across and there was no sword light. The height of the horizontal line was just at the waist of Ma Kuxuan and Zhou Mi, as if there was an invisible sword fairy, and the sword was swung across the world. That Zhou Mi looked calm, just stood where he was, allowing his body to be cut into two by the waist. The upper half of his body was a little bit. There was no scene of blood and flesh splattering. His body was not an illusion. The cut by the sword light was indeed a real thing. It was just cut open, the gaps in the two waists flowed and overflowed with bursts of dazzling glazed brilliance. The two brilliance rose and fell as if they were trying to connect together by themselves and put this body together again, but they were blocked by the remaining sword intent. Up the road. This body is like an empty shell of a straw bag. It's just a straw bag under the skin, but it is worthy of the name and priceless. It is actually the glazed body refined from a large amount of gold and copper coins. As if receiving some sort of instruction from Ma Kuxuan, Zhou Mi stretched out his hand to grab the pocket thunder pool, the size of a jujube pit, and another ray of sword light fell straight to the top of the wall, splitting Zhou Mi's head apart. The two parts of the body became 4 parts. The two sword lights can't actually be said to be one or one, and a complete huge section. The sword light traverses the entire small world. The sword light bloomed very quickly, flashed away and continued continuously. Once cut again and again, the Zhoumi form was cut into pieces, and the crisscross sword lights were left in place, making the city's top Zhoumi fragmented. A general picture appalling. Ma Kexuan's figure disappeared, but Qin Pingon suddenly turned around and handed out a sword. The existence like a speck of dust in the sky instantly transformed into a majestic Dharma figure with a height of 1,000 feet, and stomped fiercely towards the slightly insignificant Qin Pingon on the ground. Ma Kexuan, the majestic incarnation of the majestic Dharma figure wearing colorful armor, was cut open by the sword light from the soles of the feet to the shoulders, like tofu without stagnation. The sword light not only broke through the Dharma figure, but the sword energy also exploded to the sides, like a pair of giant hands, forcibly stretching the body of Ma Kexuan's Dharma figure to the sides. Qin Pingon frowned slightly. It was normal for ordinary monks in the same realm to be cut open by a sword in their own world. But Ma Kexuan is not an ordinary fairy, the golden body shouldn't be so fragile. At this moment Qin Pingan's heartstrings were tense, his thoughts changed rapidly, and he finally chose a compromise method. Avoiding and not fighting restrained his whereabouts and hid himself. It turned out that when Zhoumi saw the top of the city, Zhoumi instantly returned to normal, the whole person became extremely real, and his aura changed completely. At that moment Qin Ping would have thought that Ma Kexuan had actually colluded with Zhoumi back then, and as a second hand who stayed in the world he was only waiting for today to kill himself and take half of him by force. With a smile on his face, Zhoumi casually raised his arms, put his fingers together and swiped down. Pointing directly at the position where Qin Pingon was standing, just as Qin Pingon walked away, an extremely deep gully appeared on the ground outside the city with his back foot, spreading out all the way. The whole caged bird world was almost broken open. The deepest part of the gully and the furthest distance were about to touch the boundary of heaven and earth. Qin Pingon, who had disappeared, was shocked and frowned. Is it really thorough? Otherwise, this move, not a mountaintop monk in the Ascension realm, would not be able to create this situation at all. Hearing Ma Kexuan's words come out in his ear, like a Taoist sage who speaks out the law, Qin Pingon was dragged out of a secret place and forced to act. The sea of clouds rolled and a golden palm made a hole, reaching out to Qin Pingon, who was hanging in the air and had no time to dodge with lightning speed. A sword was stretched out and it did penetrate the golden palm that was as big as a mountain, but it still slammed down with great momentum and Qin Pingon had to punch it right. The earth trembled and the dust was flying. Qin Pingon, who was thrown down, knelt on one knee and was located in the center of the pit, vomiting a mouthful of blood. Ma Kexuan said that he doesn't learn boxing, so why is this palm, which is hard to say whether it is a magic technique or a supernatural power, not weaker than Chao's boxing technique? Without turning his head, Qin Ping's backhand is a sword. However, Zhoumi, who followed him like a shadow, easily grasped the tip of the Yao sword with his 2 fingers. Zhoumi raised his hand, and the sword energy condensed into a long sword. He returned the sword and slashed at Qin Pingan's shoulder. Qin Ping's body turned into dozens of sword lights, and suddenly recondensed into his real body more than 100 miles away. The next moment, on the ground, Ma Kexuan, who seemed to be a prophet, opened a fist and punched himself. The fist is mighty, unrivaled. Between this punch and Qin Pingon, hundreds of mirrors shattered and splashed in all directions, creating a splendid scene. This is the advantage of taking advantage of the right time and place. Even if there is a temporary corridor of mirrors to block this punch, Qin Pingon still needs to shrink and move laterally to avoid the punch. It's very strange that Zhoumi made a formula, read a word of withdrawal, and the gully on the ground disappeared instantly, as if going back in time and returning to its original state. Ma Kexuan hooked his finger at Qin Pingon. Just as Qin Pingon was about to speak, Zhoumi walked forward slowly and said with a smile, "Qin Jianxian will disappoint you with the swordsmanship of the engraver at the top of the city." Qin Pingon said, "I don't even dare to say my name. Is it because I am afraid that I will find your hiding place, or because I am worried that the real body will notice the clues? He will shatter your glazed golden body with a single thought?" Zhoumi said, "I don't dare to call you by his name. How dare Qin Jianxian call Zhoumi by his name?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "I'm a trash, so it doesn't prevent you from being even more trash." Zhoumi said, "I have read 2 stories in a book. The protagonists in the stories survived not because they are the protagonists, but because they survived to be the protagonists. The background of a story begins in a place called Nipping Lane in Huaihuang County. The protagonist is surnamed Qin. The other story earlier started with a scholarly family in Shenzhou, Middle-earth and turned to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The most chapters are in the Wild World and it ends with Haoren. The ending is temporarily undecided. Qin Pingon said suddenly, "Understood, good method." Sort of coming chapter 1096. Regardless of whether Qin Pingon really knew it or pretended to understand, Ma Kuxuan was indeed cheated. Taking advantage of Ma Kuxuan's mind stagnation and a moment of stunned, Qin Pingon was amnesty and the caged bird escaped. Taking a step back, there were ripples, and a portal was opened out of thin air behind him. Qin Ping's body was submerged in a secret landscape of mountains and rivers that Zhou Mi compared to a silkworm cocoon, and he left the fantasy world of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The eye-catching bright red color was instantly lost in his field of vision. Ma Kuxuan couldn't see it clearly, but he didn't look anxious at all. But Zhou Mi saw the way at a glance and explained, "Using the method of moving mountains is to make mountains come to my supernatural power. His move is just a deliberate cover-up. In short, he can switch the secret location at any time on his own territory, which is more straightforward than shrinking thousands of miles of ground veins into a square inch. Concealment. In ordinary disputes with the same border remain invincible." Ma Kuxuan said, "Time is limited, so stop talking nonsense and lead me to catch up." Zhou Mi smiled and nodded and patted himself on the head lightly, and 3 flowers gathered on the top, transforming into a golden Daoist crown that seemed to be pieced together from Baiyujing, Xianxia, Tuyue Mountain and other places. Xian's restrained body was about the size of a mustard seed, turned into a rainbow light, and swept into the Daoist crown, like an ancient sitting in the center of the heaven. Zhou Mi took a closer look, followed the clues left by Qin Pingan's Dao Qi, strode forward, opened a door with both hands and entered it and came to a bustling market with a small bridge and flowing water. There was a sauce garden nearby. As long as the ordinary people on the street are close to Zhou Mi, they will melt like snow and turn into nothingness by themselves. Zhou Mi waved his sleeves and a majestic aura swept out. All the pedestrians, buildings and hilltops in this world were cut off from the top half. The back, collapsed and sunken everywhere, turned into ruins in the blink of an eye, and everything turned into dust and dust floating between the sky and the earth far away. A ray of light flashed away. Zhou Mi smiled, found it, and sat on the golden Ma Kuxuan in the Daoist crown, grasped the sword formula with his hand, and there was a sword light flying in the air like a dragon running through the water, sweeping out of the mountain top. It goes straight down the river, so this is the most direct and shortest path. A ray of sword light was thousands of miles away, and hit the glorious figure who couldn't dodge. The latter used his fists to fight the sword energy, resisting stubbornly, attacking and defending, and splashed a spray on the spot. Ma Kuxuan obviously heard that guy swearing at his mother, swearing like a lost dog. He ran into another place to hide in embarrassment, and continued to avoid his edge, delaying time first and then looking for a way to defeat the enemy. Zhou Mi said, "The other party probably has determined that I am not Zhou Mi's real body." If Zhou Mi really used Ma Kuxuan as the personal crossing between heaven and earth, and came here to plot against Qin Pingon, it wouldn't take so much trouble and it would have already ended at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Ma Kuxuan said angrily, "I thought that your last words were words that only you could say, which could make him more convinced that you are the real body. Didn't I think that it made him suspicious instead?" Zhou Mi smiled and said, "You are superfluous. I reminded you at the time to accept it as soon as you see it. It is supposed to be a fake to the end, it is the whole truth. It is like a delicate landscape painting, but you want to capture a freehand flower. Anyone who sees it will feel inappropriate." While speaking, Zhou Mi had already stepped forward, this time directly smashing through the barrier between the 2 phantom worlds with his body, crossing the boundary and changing the ground, and a gorgeous scene like glass shattering appeared around him. Heavy rain, a convoy of refugees on the muddy road, there are boxes scattered on both sides that may have rolled down by themselves, or may have been pushed down by the servants of the coachman. Many open boxes and books fell out. Rare books have survived fires and moths, but they cannot escape this war. In this chaotic world, books are probably worth less than antiques. They are heavy and cannot be exchanged for money. If you don't lose them, you will lose nothing. Zhou Mi, with the golden crown on his head, squatted down and picked up a rotten book covered in yellow mud. Ma Kuxuan urged him to find out Qin Pingan's whereabouts. Press and hold the top of the word Qin for a while, and then find the rest of the word pinyin on another page and then shake your wrist lightly. A rare book that is said to be worth 1 or 2 gold per page was shaken off, leaving only 3 gold coins. The text hangs in the air. Zhou Mi then stomped his feet lightly, using methods similar to summoning the gods and ordering the land. The 3 golden characters were crumbling, their expressions were dim, and finally turned into ashes without light. They fell into the mud with the rain, but Qin Pingon was still missing. Ma Kuxuan laughed loudly and said, "Is it because you are not hot enough, or is this guy Qin Ping's golden body too calm?" Zhou Mi smiled, then picked out a few more books on the ground, and made up the name Qin Pingon from the black and white books. Then quickly turn out Luapa and Mountain from the pages of the book, and then take the hidden characters from Xinyin and the official characters from Huanyo respectively. In order not to make a fool of himself again, Zhou Mi simply spelled out the words Great Wall of Sword Qi, Li Zhu Dong Tian, and Anai Ping Lane. As a result, 2 sacred treasures were hung in front of Zhou Mi, and they were respectively written Qin Pingon in Luapa Mountain and Hidden Official in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. In addition, each of the talismans still has a line of narration footnotes in small characters. Nipping Lane Lizhu Cave. Zhou Mi said, "It will definitely succeed." Ma Kuxuan comprehended, waited for Zhou Mi's lips to move slightly and issued another order, and Ma Kuxuan, who was waiting for the rabbit, was the first to deliver a punch which was still Chao Si's punching style and strength. His intent was superior to that of Chao Ci in the contest between Qing and Bai in the Zhongtu Confucian Temple. Obviously at that time, neither Chao Ci nor Qin Pingon had a tacit understanding and did not use their full strength. Qin Pingon, who was forcibly recruited, did not know what methods Ma Kuxuan would use and could not prescribe the right medicine, so it was difficult to fight back. He could only defend himself as much as possible. Outside of a bright red robe, there were tens of thousands of the talismans of various colors are layered on top of each other, like dozens of long rivers of talismans, entwined into a ball, protecting the real body in the center of the circle. It's a pity that although there are many methods, Ma Kuxuan's punch smashed the river of talismans, the light was distorted and the scene was chaotic, but Qin Pingon just glanced at Zhou Mi, raised his arms to block in front of him, and then his body like a stone, it slammed into a stretched curtain cotton cloth, pulling the cloth to gather in the center of the stone, and the world, mountains, rivers and people's buildings were accumulated in the folds of the cloth. Ma Kuxuan raised his hand and countless golden lightning bolts crazily bombarded the center of the bottom of the pit. Zhou Mi issued another decree to forcibly recall Qin Pingon, the landlord of this world. A purple sword light flashed from Zhou Mi's eyebrows and pierced Qin Pingon's head, so close that he couldn't avoid it. Qin Pingon had no choice but to turn his head slightly, and the slender sword light cut a deep wound with bones visible on his face. In this fight, Ma Kuxuan could be said to have the upper hand, and with his careful teamwork, Qin Pingon, who is the host, was powerless to fight back. When the aura of the Imperial Talisman was exhausted, Qin Pingon finally regained his freedom and escaped into the boundless void, but Zhou Mi followed him like a shadow again, changing places, showing a Dharma image, stepping on the ground and trampling a mountain under his feet into powder. Bowing his head and arching his back, he opened the curtain of the sky with his back. He was wearing golden armor and turned into a mighty holding a lightning whip. Once the whip fell to the ground, the whip tip rolled a few more times and whipped the ground several times. In the blink of an eye, and the capital city with millions of inhabitants was smashed into dilapidated ruins, and thus became the site of the battlefield for the Immortal family to fight their skills. A thin sword light spread along the lightning whip. Ma Kuxuan chopped it off with just a flick of his fingers. The sword light of a sword fairy is so vulnerable. The situation is beyond his control. Qin Pingon has to change the battlefield again, use different geographical locations in exchange for the passage of time, and try to delay the time. Countless uncivilized creatures on the earth stared blankly at the flames that broke through the sky, reflecting the sky and the earth at night like day, as if a natural disaster was imminent. A huge swamp in a barbarian land was directly filled up by an extraterrestrial star falling to the ground. The huge momentum caused the whole small world to be shattered, and the sound of the cracking of the sky and the earth's axis came one after another, and the illusion was like a piece of porcelain that was about to be broken. However, Qin Pingon had already left this place and fled to the last secret place of mountains and rivers, just like someone leaving from the side door of the house, walking in through the main entrance by detour and killing the carbine. Never thought that a small bronze clock would appear in the sky, and then a giant hand as white as jade would appear. Just a slight shake and a loud bang, the whole world would be shattered. The owner of that giant hand, Zhou reminded with his heart. It's been half a stick of incense in the past. Ma Kuxuan grinned. As far as I know, when this guy fights with others, he fights hard. He doesn't know how to run away like that. Gaining the upper hand but still unable to seriously injure Qin Pingon. Unable to turn the advantage into a victory, just like a stack of banknotes in the pocket that cannot be cashed. It is not beautiful after all. Zhou smiled and said, before he hadn't mastered swordsmanship, what's the benefit of running away? He might as well fight hard. Now that he knows he is invincible, anyone would choose to retreat. Ma Kuxuan clasped the back of his head with his hands and sat in this messy dojo that was stitched together. The mouse has been running around for so long, I don't know how far he has solved the puzzle. Zhou said, don't procrastinate any longer, later changes will happen. Ma Kuxuan smiled lazily, you are an outsider in this game. For Ma Kuxuan, his leisurely pursuit and Qin Pingan's aggrieved escape are like the hide-and-seek game that children often play. Ma Kuxuan said regretfully, I was shocked I didn't take the bait. Zhou said, it's a good move for you to deliberately let him choose the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He will naturally think of I and the boss sword Immortal. You didn't make him think of the word Qingqingdu in his heart, it's just a stinky move. Ma Kuxuan said, it's a pity. I blame me for being too big. After all, I couldn't invite a complete third god. Zhou smiled and said, I have already said that this person is a scholar after all, and he should be cautious in a dark room and not lose his heart, so even in his mind, it is impossible to call Qingqing by his name. Ma Kuxuan pouted, disapproving. Zhou said, choosing Qingqingdu is worse than choosing left and right. Ma Kuxuan said indifferently, the ostentation needs to be big, and if you want to choose, of course you should choose the person with the best swordsmanship. Even with half of Qingqingdu's Taoism and 50% off swordsmanship, the power will not be too weak, right? Zhou smiled and shook his head, feeling helpless. It turned out that in Ma Kuxuan's mind world, there were 3 incense and fire tables at the same time, but there was only one incense burner with incense, and the smoke curled up, enshrining the 3 people. In addition to Wenhai Zhou and Chao Ci in white, there is also an old man wielding a sword, who is Qingqingdu, the eldest sword fairy of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. It's just that compared to the former 2, Qingqing's face is relatively blurred, and his figure is uncertain. Ma Kuxuan's visualization is similar to some kind of mysterious refining and casting, which can erect a faceless statue of clay sculpture and wood carving on the altar. Of course, there is a limit to the height of their golden bodies, which is of course linked to Ma Kuxuan's realm. Qi practitioners stop at the Ascension realm and martial arts fighters stop at the realm. Otherwise, since the daring Ma Kuxuan even dared to visualize Wenhai Zhou, why didn't he just move out the patriarchs of the 3 religions and enshrine them on the altar? The same is the Fengjing landscape gods, the Zhongtu Confucian temple, the Dalisong dynasty, and a small country under the Aquarius continent. Although the Fengjing of the 3 are reasonable, legal and orthodox, their ranks are different. Qin Pingan's imagination, the idea of being related to someone, is equivalent to opening the face for the statue, and responsible for painting gold and color, making the statue more lifelike and more real. Ma Kuxuan carefully preset 3 god statues for Qin Pingan to wait for the latter to go. The thoroughness of Taoism, Chao Ci of martial arts, and Qingqingdu of swordsmanship. It just so happened that these 3 had appeared in the Great Wall of Sword Qi one after another. In a secret world where a certain civil servant was setting up a table by the river to pray for rain, and the common people paraded through the streets and burned paper dragon kings, Qin Pingan leaned on a sword with one hand and wiped away the blood that flowed from his ears to his temples. He has been beaten all the time and his injuries are serious, but fortunately he hasn't hurt his real body, soul and Tao. If Zhou's present world is a riddle for which Ma Kuxuan has given clues a long time ago, then the answer to the riddle is indeed the word visualization. Assuming what Ma Kuxuan said was true and did not accept Zhou's invitation to ascend to the sky, then whether it is Zhou's cultivation level or Chao Ci's real boxing skills, Qin Pingan is of course closer to the truth than Ma Kuxuan. That is to say, Ma Kuxuan's supernatural powers, which seem to be cheating, have natural limitations. It cannot be imagined by him but by Qin Pingan. Just like a game of fishing with no loss, Ma Kuxuan conceived Wenhai Zhou holding a fishing rod, and the fish he caught was a certain person's name that Qin Pingon thought of. As long as Qin Pingon bites the bait and thinks of someone, Ma Kuxuan will take the opportunity to lift the pole and put it in the fish basket, becoming real. And this person is Ma Kuxuan's catch. Became Qin Pingan's imaginary enemy at the moment. For example, Xianxia. Because Qin Pingan's thoughts are like a surging river, and all the people Qin Pingan knows are all fishes in the water. No, besides Xianxia there is Zhou Mi. Qin Ping suddenly realized at this moment, when did Ma Kuxuan the dog day have such a brain? Zhou Mi, who appeared at the beginning of the city, was clearly a hint to Qin Pingan. That's why Zhou Mi was just an ostentation to scare people from the beginning, and it is estimated that his methods were not very clever at that time. But after Ma Kuxuan displayed his magical power of visualization at a certain moment, Qin Pingan was always on guard against that face-to-face Zhou Mi, who was actually endowed with real meaning by Qin Pingan. A first-class authentic work. It's like a person who survived in name only and finally came back to life. In a sense, this is Qin Pingan asking for trouble. Because whatever you fear in your heart will come true. Ma Kuxuan cheated Qin Pingan once without making a fuss. Just like a ceremony of enshrining of mountains and rivers, Ma Kuxuan was in charge of name and marriage, and Qin Pingan, who had learned the Tao, was in charge of reality and marriage, and finally appeared an orthodox apotheosis. Ordinary people need to burn incense when they enter the temple to worship the gods. Usually 3 sticks of incense are lit. Presumably Ma Kuxuan's way of asking the gods to come down to the truth is also a similar ritual system. Better be so. What if Ma Kuxuan lit the 9 sticks of incense? Qin Pingan would have to bear it for such a long time. He didn't dare to stay here for a long time, that Zhou Mi didn't know what kind of means he used, and his ghost was simply lingering. Qin Pingan didn't wait for the other party to catch up, and reluctantly took a breath of pure qi and immediately changed the venue. As expected, as soon as Qin Pingan left, a heavy rain fell in this area. Raindrops the size of soybeans, every raindrop all formed by the condensed sword energy, piercing the earth, mountains and rivers into dense sieves filled with countless holes. Ma Kuxuan wondered, Qin Kingda's swordsmanship is only half of the Daoist skill. Is it that exaggerated? Zhou Mi asked with a smile. Finally regretted it? Ma Kuxuan sneered and said, what regrets? I like the dumb to eat Coptus chinensis the most in my life. Don't waste it. With half of Qin Kingda's swordsmanship you can really use it. Zhou Mi smiled slightly, held a sword in his hand and cut through several Qin Pingan hearts with one sword. In order to block this sword light, a Yao sword with a rank of immortal weapon was cut off on the spot. A bright red magic robe that was also a fairy grade was torn apart by the unstoppable sword energy. Standing in a vast and boundless realm of Taishu, Qin Ping returned the 2 severed swords to the long sword behind him. Although the magic robe on his body was severely damaged, it could still be closed by itself. His body was almost chopped off by a sword. Even if his body was cut off, a qi practitioner in the immortal realm would be able to recover after cultivation. Zhou Mi raised the sword and then let the light of the sword fall into Qingming. A golden arch bridge was chopped into pieces on the spot. Qin Ping's defensive swordsmanship seems to have been learned secretly from the ranger Su Ruo. The entire Taishu realm reverberated with the violent sound aroused by the sword energy. Qin Pingan stood on the fragmented capital of a golden arch bridge and asked, what is the price you have to pay? The shamans on the mountain set up the altar and invite the gods to come down to the truth. They all need to follow certain rules. Although qi practitioners have various methods and shortcuts to minimize their own damage, the price that qi practitioners should pay is never in vain. Zhou Mi didn't even bother to remind him with his heart, so he said directly, why don't you kill him and let's talk about the past? Ma Kuxuan and Qin Pingan were like 2 village children playing house games over there. You come and go as long as you dare to think about it. Of course it was just a quarrel. But just like one of the kids cheated, he could have a dream come true and the other one was just a dream. Qin Pingan and Zhou Mi had their own questions, but Ma Kuxuan answered irrelevant questions. You actually guessed that you were in a certain situation and I turned against you, but you only thought about it 3 times and I was unpredictable, so every time it didn't work. If you are suppressed by the idea that things are just 3 things, then you simply don't even dare to think about it anymore. Zhou Mi sighed and said with a regretful expression, why take the initiative to give the answer to the mystery? Be careful not to fail. Ma Kuxuan, what are you thinking? Qin Pingan was expressionless. In an instant the 3 altars and statues in Ma Kuxuan's mind world collapsed. Just like the final destination of the statues in the immortal tomb in their hometown, ashes to ashes to ashes. Zhou Mi was slightly taken aback and instantly thought of the reason. He laughed loudly, and before his body disappeared he sincerely praised, "Qin Pingon, you have a good trick. As I said earlier, you will not deceive me." It turned out that Qin Ping used another method of beheading himself with a sword, beheading Zhou Mi, Chao Xiai and Qin Qing all in his own state of mind. Ma Kuxuan stepped on the tip of a golden arched bridge with a little tiptoe, squatted down and asked with a smile, "You paid such a high price just to play with me until now, what are you trying to do?" Qin Pingon sat cross-legged on the fragments of the arch bridge and said, "The facts prove that I played with you in the previous few fights." Ma Kuxuan asked doubtfully, "Really?" Qin Ping sneered and said, "What am I going to do with a fool?" Ma Kuxuan tilted his head, staring blankly at that peer. This time Qin Pingon was injured so badly, and the price he paid was so high that even the longsword was broken. "All of these are not fake?" Ma Kuxuan asked. After hearing Zhou Mi's words, "You really want to understand the beginning and the end? You can even guess who the 3 gods I invited were at that time? You can really count the last person it is Qin Qingdu?" Qin Pingon sneered, "Are you still thinking about Qin Qingdu? Come on, try it out. See if the boss sword fairy you invited out is faster at handing the sword, or is my memory earlier?" Ma Kuxuan asked curiously, "Could it be that you used the method of going against the flow of the long river of time?" Qin Ping shook his head and said, "I thought about trying it once or twice, but I don't have the ability to hold you back for the time being. What's more, this kind of method, the consumption of time and time, is irreversible. It is no less expensive than the current price." Ma Kuxuan nodded and said, "This is reasonable. Otherwise it would be too unreasonable. Wouldn't it be that the Ascension realm, which is 1 level higher than yours, is being played by you between applause?" Ma Kuxuan stood up and said, "If I win, you will naturally stop everything. But if I accidentally lose, you have to promise me one thing." Qin Pingon said, "You talk about it first, and whether you agree or not, talk about it later." Ma Kuxuan said, "At Moss Mansion, those who you think should die, and give them a good time. Those who should live, and you should stop editing memories and manipulating people's hearts." Qin Pingon remained silent. Ma Kuxuan smiled and said, "Then I'll take it as your default." The next moment Ma Kuxuan's figure suddenly became immeasurably large. He held an ancient star in the palm of his hand, and slammed it towards Qin Pingon. Qin Pingon tried it, and he was also so powerful. With a flick of his sleeve he smashed a river of bright stars at the image of Ma Kuxuan. In this double realm where Qin Pingan's flying sword is in the cage and Ma Kuxuan's contemplation exists, both sides show their supernatural powers, and the power of each method is unimaginable. Countless battlefields that were originally densely covered with stars were turned into large blank ruins by both sides. Fortunately, they are all illusions, otherwise the great monks of the Yin-Yang school and the 5 Elements school, together with the Heavenly Heaven supervisor and Qi trainer, would probably go crazy. However, it is false to the outside world, but it is so true to both sides of the battlefield that it cannot be taken lightly. If one is not careful, it will hurt the body and the heart. Time flies by. I don't know how long it has passed. Ma Kuxuan suddenly invited out a statue of Qin Qingdu. Qin Pingon almost instinctively threw out a sword with all his might. Cut that Ma Kuxuan together with the illusion into nothingness. Ma Kuxuan was sitting in the void, his body turned into countless golden lights. A little light appeared from the sky. The golden light carrying the soul could have followed the light and left the cage. I never thought that the golden light would stagnate for a while, as if looking back at Qin Pingon, who had been an old enemy for many years, and then the golden light shook by itself, completely shattering the soul, refusing to have any afterlife, absolutely not accepting this Qin Pingan's good intention of dissolving the bird from its shape. A golden torrential rain began to fall in this caged bird. He even seemed to deliberately not to see the reunion in the ancestral hall of the Ma Mansion, and everyone woke up from a dream. It was as if he could only trust Qin Ping's verbal promise. The Ma couple only had half a sweet dream. First, Qin Pingon was stopped by his son Ma Kuxuan, and they were able to successfully become a pair of landscape gods who were sheltered by Fingdu. It was a veritable nightmare. When I was full of ambition, I was suddenly detained and went to the Qinghuang temple for trial. The verdict was harsh. After more than 20 reincarnations, I was not allowed to be a human being. In the end, I was restored to a human body and married again. However, I suffered a lot in that life. died unexpectedly. The rest of the Ma clan have also come to their senses, and after looking at each other they see each other as enemies. A family that was deeply rooted in the Yushuan kingdom and could be described as a colossus was disbanded. Either the subordinates committed crimes against the superiors, or they fought to separate the family. Qin Pingon stood outside the gate of the Ma family. It was still Qingming, but the rain stopped. Wearing a green shirt and a long coat, with an umbrella under his arm, he walked slowly, heading elsewhere. In Chongning County, the capital city, Wu Di, a Taoist priest who worked as a fortune teller, even stayed in the house that he rented later. Qin Pingon just passed by the Yamen shrine and heard a familiar voice and came to the top of the Sword Qi Great Wall in a trance. On the top of the city stands Li Xing. The current situation is both true and false. Qin Ping put away the umbrella under his arm and bowed to salute. Li Xing nodded and said, "The Zhou that Ma Kushuan came up with is fake, so you don't have to worry about it. But whether Zhou will see your current situation, realm and mentality through this matter, I don't guarantee it." Qin Pingon breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing is believing, hearing is believing. Li Xing said, "The injury is not light." Qin Pingon said, "Compared to the earliest expectations, it is still a bit better. I have to practice my sword knight tour again and mend that fairy robe. Headaches are headaches, it's better than falling. I saw the Zhou behind Ma Kushuan before, and knew that this matter must be cautious. If it really is Zhou who stays in the human world, the consequences will be disastrous. It is necessary to let Confucian Temple know about this matter immediately, and at the same time try not to let the sages of Confucian Temple interfere with his revenge." But Qin Pingon only knows the supernatural power of shrinking the earth, and he doesn't know how to cross continents in one step like Hulong Daoist. One of the most straightforward methods is to call Li Xing's real name several times in his heart. At that time, Li Xing only replied that he knew and there was no further comment. Even so, Qin Pingon took a reassurance, walked out of the Ma's ancestral hall, let go of his hands and feet and went to fight with Ma Kushuan. Li Xing asked, "How do you feel when you have endured for so many years and your revenge is avenged?" Qin Pingon was a little tired, so he squatted on the top of the city at will and looked into the distance. In this world, except for the Great Wall of Sword Qi, which was strictly in line with reality, the landscape of mountains and rivers in the wild world deviated greatly from the real situation. 100,000 mountains, Tuyue Mountain, Yiluo and other places. As long as Qin Pingon has been there and seen them with his own eyes, they have all been relocated and clustered together just like a warehouse for storing things. Qin Pingon was silent for a moment, then said calmly, "I did something that must be done and I don't seem to feel much joy. Just take it for granted." Li Xing said with a smile, "You can drink as you like." Qin Ping took out the Yangjian gourd and drank it. Li Xing asked suddenly, "If you were in my position, what would you do?" "You don't need to say more, just sum it up in one sentence." Qin Pingon was dumbfounded for a moment. How could I answer such a huge question without even thinking about it? In the ancient times, Li Xing once joined hands with Mr. Sanshanjiuho to have a far-reaching change. Descendants who know something about this old almanac often think that it is lenient to lose and secret to lose. In fact, on the contrary, it is because the laws and regulations re-edited by Li Xing are too cumbersome and meticulous. Qin Pingon thought about it for a moment and tentatively said, "Do you want to find the greatest common divisor for all living things in Hauran?" Li Xing nodded and said with a smile, "This answer is not bad, he is worthy of being a national teacher." Qin Pingon didn't say anything. It wasn't bad, that is, it wasn't good. I am no stranger to this kind of public speaking. Qin Pingon hesitated for a moment, picked up the snow at his feet, grabbed a snowball and said boldly, "Li Xing, don't let me go to the Confucian Temple as an errand?" Assuming that Li Xing entered the 15th realm, there would be an extremely important vacancy on the side of the Confucian Temple, and someone would have to replace him, who would be responsible for handling the complicated affairs of the two highest and lowest places in the world. Of course, Qin Pingon did not mean to fill the vacant position of the Sage of Rites. No matter how courageous he was, he would not dare to think so. Rather, it was similar to the relationship between the minister and the doctor in the 6 government offices of the secular dynasty. Not less than half. Li Xing glanced at Qin Pingon with a half-smile. Qin Pingon immediately knew that he was thinking too much. Li Xing rarely joked, "I really dare to think and dare to do it. Why don't you just say that I will make up for my Confucian Temple position?" There is no burden in chatting like this, and Qin Pingon is not embarrassed at all. If there is no taboo to open up the chat, who brought out the atmosphere of the summer palace? Because Li Xing needs to sit outside the sky and keep an eye on the trajectory of the green road. After Zhou Xian returned to Xinghe Dojo, he roughly mentioned Qin Pingan's way to break through with Li Xing. In words, he highly appreciated it. They all called Qin Pingan Daoyuchen. Qin Pingan asked, "Over the years, has Li Xing ever been unable to resist?" Li Xing smiled and said, "I'm not young anymore. How decent is it to fight and kill?" For a moment, Qin Pingan was not sure whether Li Xing's words were expressed out of emotion or with puns. In short, this sentence only meant the literal meaning. If Xiao Mo and Xiego were present, they would not like to hear it. I once heard Xiego talk about an embarrassing incident about Xiaomo in her family. That stupid big scholar was accompanied by a scholar who was very good at fighting. People afraid of his eggs. As a result, after the sword questioning session was over, Xiao Mo told the Bixiao cave master of Luobaotan that the young master was not weak. Qin Pingan couldn't trust Xiego. After all, she liked to exaggerate, so she went to the person concerned to verify it. At that time, Xiao Mo was annoyed. Li Xing asked, "The wild battlefield, the Confucian temple is still well arranged, but there is a lack of a position similar to your sword Qi Great Wall criminal officer. Do you have any ideas? Don't worry, there will be a reward." Without hesitation, Qin Pingan said firmly, "No." Li Xing nodded, not embarrassing Qin Pingan. "Then find someone else." Qin Pingan knew that this was Li Xing's way of doing things. He acted resolutely and said what he said. "There's no need to go around with a junior like myself. As far as the position of criminal officer is concerned, it is true that anyone who sits on it will feel like sitting on pins and needles. Those with a low realm cannot convince the public. Those with a high enough realm, such as Zhang Tianlai, the celestial master of Longhu Mountain, and Hulong Daoist, are highly respected. When you become a criminal officer, you must defend people. Torturing the monster clan is not a difficult task, but it will be thankless if you want to say that rewards and punishments are given within Haoran Xianxia." Li Xing said with a smile, "Refuse this matter, there is no burden." Qin Pingan nodded and continued to drink. The only one who is most familiar with the wild world is the Great Wall of Sword Qi, not one of them. Qin Pingan is the most well-known person in the wild world, or not one of them. Jing Juzhong in Baidi City is actually the best candidate, and indeed the #1 candidate for the Confucian Temple. Jing Juzhong is already good at everything, not to mention that now he has 314 realms in one person. Unfortunately, Jing Juzhong declined. Not only that, Jing Juzhong even asked himself to withdraw from the wild world. The reason was that he was going to retreat in Baidi City. In fact, Li Xing knew well that Jing Juzhong wanted to make further progress and was ready to formally establish a religion and call himself the ancestor. Li Xing suddenly asked, "Have you ever been to the 100,000 mountains of Taoist fellow Jitsi?" Qin Ping shook his head and said, "I've only seen it from a distance, but I haven't had a chance to go there." Li Xing said, "To the 100,000 mountains in the south, to the Mirage ruins in the north, you can go today if you want. After half an hour you will return to the city on time. Remember not to delay, otherwise you will have to run back to the vase by yourself." Continent. Qin Pingan stood up and was about to speak when Li Xing disappeared. Chuan Dashan, the highest mountain in the center, just as Qin Pingan fell to the ground, he saw the rickety old man with his hands behind his back, as thin as wood, with sunken cheeks and skinny. But it is such a seemingly old person who has been rooted here for thousands of years in the dojo. So the patriarch Tueshan has no choice but to be unable to take that half step and enter the 15th realm. I remember that Bai Jing commented on this matter. If she had been the co-lord of the wilderness, she would have used the entire Tuyue mountain to smash the 100,000 mountains. Qin Pingan clasped his fists and said, "The junior Qin Pingan met the seniors." The old blind man said, "Young girl Ning just left not long ago, but unfortunately you are of a low level and you are an immortal. Even if you leave now, you will not be able to catch up with her. Girl Ning is almost at Fuyazu." Qin Pingan said straight to the point, "There is something I want to ask senior." The old blind man said, "You want to ask me why I watched Ning girl get injured in Liju Cave?" Qin Pingan said, "It's not a question, it's just a solution." The old blind man rubbed his chin. "According to my temper, I'm definitely going to make a move. A great wall of sword chi has lasted thousands of years. There are only a handful of sword cultivators that I like, from the earliest dragon lord to the one who has everything. Very good, but Zhong Yuan with bad luck, Dong Sanging who was bitten by a dog passing by here, and Ningyao, there are only a few of them. They are all counted and they are not more than one hand. But Qin Qing seems to have taken the wrong medicine. At that time I stopped me and said that there is no need to make a move. Do you think it is strange? Qin Pingon asked. Before the last sacrificial officer left, what kind of secret was revealed with the boss sword Immortal? The old blind man said perfunctorily, Qin Qing is dead and the country of Yen is not dead. When did you become high-level and courageous? And finally you don't have to be a shrinking turtle who endures humiliation and dares to wander in the Qingming world. Lord Yingguan, go ask Yen Guo by yourself. Qin Pingon knew that he couldn't ask any more secrets, so he cupped his hands and said goodbye, and planned to visit the former site of the mirage. As a result he hit a wall and had to turn back. The old blind man smiled and said, come if you want, leave if you want. Lord Yingguan thinks this is a latrine? Qin Pingon couldn't see any expression on his face, and he didn't have a single word in his heart. His Dao heart remained silent. The old blind man with empty eyes raised his head and looked at the sword cultivator in front of him. The sword fairy, who is less than 50 years old, is considered outstanding in the history of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. How can Ping become such a Qin Pingon? Have you done rough calculations and statistics? Qin Pingon said, there are too many of them, I can't count them. The old blind man laughed. I've always had a bad mouth. When I talk to people I like to spew excrement all over my mouth as if I just ate hot feces. Don't mind me. Qin Pingon was a little caught off guard. It is definitely impossible to fight, and I am afraid of encountering such a way when arguing with others. The old blind man stretched out his fingernails, gently grabbed a bit of flesh and said with emotion, I really met someone who didn't look right. Even if my little master let you in, I slapped you back. When I met someone who was a little bit unobtrusive, I'm too lazy to talk so much nonsense. So don't think that if you killed Xing Ma Kushuan, the half-owner of my eyeball, I would hate you. It's because Ma Kushuan has the least human flavor in him. Qin Pingon did not comment on this but only asked, Xiago also left? The old blind man raised his chin and said, Bai Jing found a place on the mountain to open up a cave. He said he was going to retreat for a few days, but he was actually hiding there for fun. Here I have to urge her to break through. Qin Pingon asked, does she show signs of breaking through? The old blind man said, no, she really wants to find a certain way and have a chance to break through. If I urge her every now and then it will be no fun. Qin Pingon was speechless. Is it okay to tease a sword cultivator of Ascension Realm perfection? Sure enough, the 14th realm is amazing. The old blind man laughed and said, no matter how poor your aptitude for cultivating Taoism is, as long as you can live for 10,000 years, is it considered a skill? Qin Pingon said, the ability to reach the sky that I dream of. The old blind man asked, do you know that blacksmith Wan of Fengxue Temple, before he went to Lizhu Cave, he had a proud disciple back then, but the two sides couldn't get together well and broke up the relationship between master and apprentice? Qin Pingon nodded and said, before in Dali City I checked the files of the Ministry of Justice. His name is Lu Jingzhuang. He likes divination and he admires Lu Qi. It is said that because of his mediocre aptitude for cultivation, he became a demon and left Fengxue Temple voluntarily. Then according to the secret, the Fengxue Temple genealogy recorded in the records shows that Lu Jingzhuang is actually from the royal family of the Lu family in the Old of Water, and his identity is actually similar to that of Yang Hua, the Water who is now Marquis of Dadichangchun. The old blind man sneered, then do you know that in Aquarius continent the Long Weixichen family that spread out from Lizhu Cave, as the eldest grandson of the current patriarch, Qin Songfeng, one of his tutors, what is your name? Qin Pingon said, according to the records in the archives, Master Lu village has a clean background, ancestral background, birth history and official travels, all of which are well documented. The Long Weixichen family screened it first, and the Dali criminal department went through it again. I didn't think much of it. Qin Pingon was deeply impressed by Qin Songfeng, a frail scholar, gentle and polite. Among the foreigners, Qin Songfeng, as the son of a wealthy family, was evaluated by Qin Pingon as a good person who must have read a lot of books. At that time, Qin Songfeng followed him, Ningyao and Lu Baqiao into the mountains to look for the regular tree. Because Qin Songfeng had never practiced martial arts and Taoism, his feet were too weak, so he became a drag. However, Qin Songfeng had no complaints when he was quite angry. What was rare was that he didn't even have any resentment in his heart. At that time Qin Pingon, although he had never seen a frog in a well in the world, but relying on his intuition and observing the details of a person's words and deeds, he had a good eye for seeing people. The old blind man said indifferently, "It's just a teacher hired by a wealthy family, but he can say to a young man who obviously has no qualifications for cultivating Taoism, how dare he say that it's nothing to sit on the lotus platform of the Taoist ancestor, and go to the blessed place to be a banished immortal who abandoned his previous life?" Qin Ping looked up at the sky. The old blind man saw that Qin Pingon had already understood in his heart, so he said to himself, "I don't know what the world will be like in 1,000 or 1,000 years. Qin Pingon said, "Perhaps people's hearts are still the same people's hearts." The old blind man asked a question for no reason. "I never thought about it. Besides the Huawei Tianma who was forcibly suppressed by the Taoist ancestor, and the porcelain figurine that your brother Chuichen took the initiative to abandon, is there any other possibility just like 10,000 years ago? This world has been turned upside down and the owner has changed again?" Qin Ping hesitated for a moment and said in his heart, "Unexpected, but I hope it won't be such a day. If there is such a day, I hope, just hope, and try to leave a way out." The old blind man patted the young sword immortal on the shoulder. "Qin Qing is not good-looking, but he has good eyesight." Qin Ping smiled wryly and was speechless. The old blind man remembered something and pointed to the north. "Gong Tang took his disciples. They happened to pass by here and now they are over there in the mirage. Not long ago Ning girl persuaded this old deaf child to go to Luopa Mountain as an offering. Gong Tang, as soon as Tang heard the proposal, his heart became hot and Pidian agreed and made up his mind to live with you in the future." Qin Pingon always felt that something was wrong. With the old deaf child's style of hiding when encountering things, it is unlikely that he wanted to go to Aquarius Island. Since he met Ning Yao by chance, he wanted to go to the colorful world with her. It is more reasonable, taking a step back and saying that if the old deaf child really wants to take refuge in himself, it is probably more likely to go to Tongyi's Hao Qingping sort sect. The old blind man lamented for no reason, happy, sad gradually. Qin Pingon thought about it carefully and said slowly, "Verse is also true." The old blind man laughed and said, "Some people say that the last hermit official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi is young and promising. He has both responsibility and strategy. He has both civil and military skills. His future is limitless." Qin Pingon knew something was wrong, so he resolutely refused to answer. The old blind man continued, "He is a person who can enter the martial arts temple to accompany sacrifices while he is alive." Qin Pingan's head was as big as a dustpan when he heard the words. The old blind man said, "What if he went to the Zhongtu Confucian temple to eat pork head at the same time? Wouldn't it be the same person who entered the Wenwu temple at the same time?" Now Qin Pingon, who was already physically and mentally haggard, almost felt unstable when he heard it. He had to take a deep breath to stabilize his emotions. Qin Shanzhu, who was used to a certain atmosphere in Luopa Mountain, couldn't bear this kind of flattery, let alone a kind of flattery with ulterior motives. There have never been such figures in the history of the major dynasties in the Hauran world. Occasionally in some small countries in history, only people can rank among the two temples of civil and military affairs, but even so they are still very few. Enter the Confucian temple of Zhongtu Shenzhou and the martial temple of the ancestral family of the military academy at the same time? No matter who it is, don't even think about it. Qin Pingon asked in a deep voice, "Dare to ask senior which said that? I'm gonna screw his head off." The old blind man smiled and said, "You're being kind, let's forget it after hearing it, why bother to ask questions?" Qin Pingon said with a smile, "I must meet him for a while and express my thanks in person." The old blind man was silent for a moment, then gave the answer, "Me." Qin Pingon was silent for a long time, thanks to senior for showing love. The old blind man, who didn't know whether it was Dao name or Jitsi, said, "It's a pity." Qin Pingon knew what this senior was talking about, but he couldn't say anything. In previous years, two children of the same age. One is the best life, but he doesn't think it is. One is the hardest one and he doesn't know it is. The family background is different, the state of mind is similar, so they all live very lonely. In their childhood they never played with their peers. The same stars were shining brightly, and someone was sitting on the small soil bag of the fairy grave, looking up at the sky with his cheeks on his hands. Someone was lying on the ridge of the field with a root of grass in his mouth, his legs raised, and the ditch was gurgling. They looked at the same starry sky together. Sort of Coming Chapter 1097. For some reason, Gukin changed his mind temporarily, and took the maid Ling Yan and the national teacher Huang Lai back to the Taoist temple with a very small appearance. Gukin walked to the door, reached out to pick up the copper door knocker, tapped 3 times, but there was no response for a long time. Gu Lingyu didn't bother to wait any longer. She went straight to her young master and knocked on the door with her fists, making a loud bang. In Chongyang Temple, which was called Alchemy in ancient times, it seemed that it finally heard the movement outside the door, creaked and opened the door, and 2 skinny young Taoist boys walked out, one tall and one short with the same yellow and thin complexion. It is indeed a cold temple. It is strange that the food is oily. Gukin chatted with the 2 Taoist boys who were standing in the threshold and then said with a smile, "I'm bothering the 2 fairies for Xianxia. I don't know if it's feasible to enter the noble temple to ask for a glass of water." The tall Taoist boy blushed in an instant, murmured, and didn't know how to answer. The little Taoist boy next to him, who had a stern face, only missed the 3 characters, "exiting guest order," on his forehead. "My name is Song Juchuan and this is my junior brother Zhou Xian. Our senior brothers have not yet been conferred and we don't have a Taoist name yet. Usually we just help the master to fight and make a few stoves for the rich and noble families in the capital to prolong their lives." Then, introducing these distinguished guests into the temple, Song Juchuan deliberately lowered his voice and said, "Master Guosher and our master call each other fellow Taoists, and we often talk about Taoism while drinking in the Taoist temple." Huang Lai, who was walking at the end of the line, chuckled, "Why don't I know? I've been here before. I don't even know that the elixir of Chongyang Temple is so popular in the capital." Gu Lingyan squinted at the sky, only saw the vision in general. A pure golden light was fleeting. She vaguely guessed that there was an image of an expert explaining the form, and the cicada had sloughed off its corpse. Although it is not comparable to those orthodox lifts, it is also a superior corpse analysis that has been completely reborn. Gu Lingyu thinks that he still has this insight. In the wild world there are often great monks who can't get promoted step by step. There is no unparalleled road, so they choose the next best thing, choose a shaded place, build a mausoleum or underground palace and walk. The road to the immortality of the tomb owner or shrine owner handed down in ancient times is carefully laid out, focusing on a form of dissolution or resurrection from death, to achieve the body of a ghost, or to win a chance for the reincarnated body to ascend to the heaven. Having just visited the Qin Tianjian, she has made a decision. It seems that she will humbly ask the young master for advice, and earnestly learn the technique of qi watching. Gu Lingji asked in his heart, "My lord, is there a result?" Gukin nodded. Gu Lingyan couldn't help but asked, "But Ma Kuxuan's skills are not as good as others and he is no match for Qin Shanju. His body was cut off and his life was ruined. It's a pity that Ma Kuxuan still used his life-saving skills in the end. Did he escape by luck? Or what's more, Ma Kuxuan was already here today, so he had a plan long ago. From the very beginning he wanted to use Xianxia's swordsmanship to help him escape so that he could take the opportunity to escape, hoping to escape. Do you want to start all over again in your next life?" Gukin didn't raise his head. As long as it's something he's thought about repeatedly before he decides to take action, there won't be any surprises. What's more, together with qi and autopsy, you're a layman so you can only watch the excitement. Gu Lingyan was very curious and asked, "Dare to ask, my lord, what is Ma Kuxuan's end?" "That is one of the 10 candidates in several worlds." "Is it so cold?" "If Ma Kuxuan were replaced by a barbaric monk, he would definitely be among the top of the heavens and his future would be bright." In fact, she also knew that the second possibility she conjectured was impossible. Ma Kuxuan's temper can be determined by those deeds alone. Ma Kuxuan is a world full of rules and regulations, and there are few people who make her feel close to her as soon as she hears the rumors. Gukin said, "I don't know the truth either, you can ask him yourself later." Gu Lingzhen sighed and said with resentful eyes, "How dare I, my teeth will chatter when I see Mr. Yingguan." Looking at the small gate of the Taoist temple from the outside, it is easy to misunderstand. It is estimated that the scale is not large. The young Daoist boy named Song Juchuan was a chatterbox. While leading the group of guests in the Taoist temple, he babbled, "Our master is the abbot of this temple. Later I became discouraged and didn't want to join forces in the officialdom, so I always became a mountain man. His old man likes to go to the mountains to collect Ganoderma, so he has cut off the fireworks a long time ago. He only needs to take polygonatum poria cocos and eat coarse clothes. Huang Qi is pickled from white womb grown in the vegetable garden. There is also a kind of self-brewed wine in the Taoist temple. Although the water is burned by the earth, it cannot be bought elsewhere with money. Our master is a real old fairy who is over 100 years old and has a strong face. Even though it is cold and snowy, the old man refuses to wear cotton wool. Yes, when you stand on the Hunyuan pile or when you sit in meditation, your whole body will emit white gas. The tall Taoist boy felt cold sweat on his forehead. Senior brother Song was too good at talking. It's just that when he thought of the lack of incense in his own Taoist temple, Zhou Xian admired and appreciated brother Song's good intentions again. Gukin smiled and said, I only heard that when Taoists exhale and refine qi, smoke of different colors such as blue and white will come out from the ear and nose openings. Song Juchuan clapped his fists. Yes, I remember Master introduced to me that those curling clouds of smoke are called crane's breath. Gukin was silent for a moment, then said with a smile, I made up the words of the crane's breath. Song Juchuan was suddenly dumbfounded with a look of astonishment. All right, the incense money is gone. The Taoist temple still has to pay for a pot of tea? Master is not angry but still holds grudges. There are dense ancient cypresses, sheltering the pond, flowers fall like fallen birds and swimming fish peck and eat them. There are 2 cats by the pond, one is pure white with a yellow tail, commonly known in the market as a gold thread hanging silver bottle. It squats like looking at the water and wants to catch fish. The other is yellow with a white belly and white feet. It is called a gold quilt and a silver bed fluttering butterflies. Song Juchuan grinned and said, Wild cats, they often go to the kitchen to steal food. Muna Zhongshan has something to say and they can't steal anything to eat. Compared with senior brother Song, Zhongshanku is the stupidest and slow to learn everything. The master always said that he is an elm lump who does not understand. If he can practice Taoism, there will be no one in the world who cannot cultivate immortals. There is an old Taoist in Guanyi Matsushita, with snow-white hair on the temples, a pair of straw sandals on his feet, on his shoulder and a bamboo basket in his hand. There are a few pieces of poria cocos stained with soil in the bamboo basket. Humming, he looked up at the sky. The old Taoist counted his fingers and shook his head. Nowadays, the secrets of the world, in short, make people more and more incomprehensible. The old Taoist walked slowly, seeing the group of people he couldn't help but feel puzzled. His own Taoist temple is usually closed, but there are pilgrims who knock on the door? Are you sending money on the pole? Is there really such a beautiful thing? I'm afraid that if the good ones don't come, the ones who come will be bad. The 2 Taoist boys saluted and said, Disciple pays homage to Master Jing. The old Taoist looked as usual, nodded his respects, handed the bamboo basket to the 2 disciples, and prepared to treat the guests himself. The old Taoist had already freed his hand at the moment, slapped the chief judge and said with a smile, The poor Taoist Qing Fengxian. The 2 disciples are used to calling the poor Taoist Master Jing. A few years ago I traveled from other continents and stopped here. There is no serious Taoist name, self-appointed, it can't be taken seriously, just like the private posthumous title of the literary scholar. Don't mention it so as not to make people laugh. Gukin asked, But the Duliang mountain near the Shui water mansion? Qing Fengxian nodded in agreement, was very surprised and said in amazement, Young master is very knowledgeable. People in the world only hear about the Shui water palace but not the capital Liangshan. Du Xiucai, who is half of Zui's shrimp soldiers, would know everything about Liangshan. Huang Lai asked suspiciously, Du Xiucai. Qing Fengxian smiled and refused to explain. Gukin introduced, In the history of Zhongtu Shenzhou, there was a Mr. Wu Song named Du, nicknamed Du Xiucai, who was as famous as Mrs. Su as a refiner. Shui Prefecture and county government offices are all located on the mountain. It is Shui when you raise your eyebrows and Yi when you stare straight at it. Along the way, the scenery along the way is not bad, with ancient buildings, ancient flowers and trees. Huang Lai couldn't help but praise the good feng shui. In the past it was dark under my lamp, but I didn't know that there was such a geomantic treasure right under my nose. The old Taoist led them to a thatched hut called Yulu, not far from the ancient pine. Gukin glanced at the plaque with graceful handwriting. Qing Fengxian pointed to the ancient pine tree. This pine was planted by the founder of this Taoist temple. It has been planted for many years. There are poria cocos under it and it is almost in human shape. Gu Lingyue glanced at the scene of the ancient pine underground, and secretly covered his mouth and smiled coquettishly. Sure enough, there are all kinds of masters and disciples who can brag and don't write drafts. Gukan said with a smile. The fairy grows tall. The implication is that he dares to speak publicly about this matter to outsiders. Gu Lingyu asked Huang Lai alone with his heartfelt voice. Can you see the strange rusticity of Poria Coco's turning into essence? Huang Lai said truthfully, I don't see anything. The old Taoist stretched out his hand and said with a smile that there was nothing wrong with it, which frightened the distinguished guests. At the finger of the Taoist priest, the two cats turned into butterflies and scattered colorfully. Gu Lingying pretended to be surprised. Huarong turned pale and leaned on Gu Kan's shoulder with an ouch. Gu Kan just put her hand against her forehead, gently pushed it away and said with a smile, How? I just said that there are many strange people in the world and there are often real heroes living in seclusion in the world. You don't believe me and you say I am suspicious. Gu Lingyue cooperated with his son to act together. As if he had realized it later, he timidly looked at the old Taoist. Dongfu territory? Viewing the sea? When he came to the gate of the hut, Gu Kan suddenly stopped and smiled and said, I'm not a professional person. I like to read miscellaneous books. I read some unorthodox knowledge and I use what I have learned to see the treasures of the precious earth gods. Chi is entangled with dragons, pans and tigers. I just knocked on the door to visit and bumped into it by mistake. I never thought that I would actually meet a worldly expert who is rare for us ordinary people in 100 years. Here, guarding the Poria Cocos to become a essence, the boy dared to ask for advice. Master, is it for taking Xianxia? Qing Fengshen's face suddenly changed and he no longer had the slightest sense of immortality. He put his fingers together like a halberd, and pointed at the young man in Confucian shirt who looked like a rich son. It's not good to wander around with your maidservants and servants, but if you dare to come here to make a mistake, the loach will chase the duck and drive you away and you're looking for death. Gu Kan said with a smile. Master Jing doesn't have to pretend to be fierce and evil and scare us mortals with naked eyes. The ordinary people in the market regard their lives as 7 feet, and the Taoists in the mountains regard their lives as 7 feet. I believe that with Master Jing's state of mind and cultivation, it is inner cultivation. Dan first used the story of Poria Cocos to become a spirit to make a sensation, and then use illusions to turn cats into butterflies. Do you want us to retreat in spite of difficulties? Or did you fall in love with the aptitude of the maid next to me, and think she has a lot of roots in cultivation? The old Taoist stroked his beard and nodded, his eyes showed admiration. Young master is elegant and gracious. Gu Kan said indifferently, Glory to the fisherman. The old Taoist laughed dumbfounded. After dozens of years of refining qi here, it was the first time I met such an honest person. Gu Kan said, How did Master Jing decide that we are not villains? Qing Fengshen Yenshu smiled and said, Pindao has a little understanding of yin and yang prophecy, astrology and qi and the skills of walking in the rivers and lakes. He dare not say that he is in the hall and he is far from the level of proficiency. Gu Kan hesitated for a moment and said slowly, I once saw 2 sentences in someone's study notes which are related to this. The old Taoist groaned and said with a smile, I would like to hear more about it. Gu Kan said slowly, When people talk about astronomy today they only go to infer calculus. I say that a gentleman who walks in heaven is a gentleman who strives for self-improvement. This is the astronomy promoted by the founders of the 3 religions. When people talk about geography today they all investigate and inspect the territory. I say that the gentleman of the terrain Kun carries things with virtue. This is the geography that the ancestors of the 3 religions share together. Master Jing thinks so? The old Taoist was surprised when he heard the words. And then suddenly with mixed feelings on his face he said, If my generation of monks can really bring the 2 phenomena of heaven and earth to themselves, the mere trick of yin and yang and 5 elements prophecy will be nothing. A wise man can never fool a fool. A fool will always take a lie to be true. Why do you say that, son? Speak out of your feelings and talk about it casually. By the way, who is the so-called so-and-so person? Can you introduce me to the poor? Cannot. Dare to ask the fairy name. Take the Dao number and return to the salary. On the top of the Zhuiyao mountain, on a tall branch of a towering ancient tree, there were 3 people standing or squatting. Not far away is the temple of the mountain god Empress, where the golden body of the Song dynasty is enshrined. The one standing is Ma Kexuan's handmaiden Zhou Xian, and the one standing is the eldest disciple Wangzu, who was renamed by Ma Kexuan, saying that the name and Taoist name can be combined into one to save trouble. In fact, they all know it well, not only because it forms an idiom with the Zhou Xian, but also because it has some homonyms with the real dragon Wang Zhu. Ma Kexuan's practice is definitely not related to the word diligence, but he has a great love for his ancestors who have forgotten his ancestors. Whether it is teaching thunder or martial arts, it can be said that he is giving everything to this Kaishan. There may be 40 if not 50 books of Daoist books and boxing records written by disciples. Today's state of forgetting one's ancestors is the two golds, the golden core state and the golden body state. His qualifications can be described as outstanding, but because his master is Ma Kexuan, it seems very ordinary, which is not enough to look at. There is also a squatting boy with a hatchet on his waist named Gao Ming. He and Ma Kexuan, the master is not like the master, and the apprentice is not like the apprentice. He likes to call Ma Kexuan Old Horse. He even asked Ma Kexuan face to face if he could switch to Luopa Mountain for 2 reasons. The hatchet boy frowned and asked, "What's going on? The old horse lost?" Wang Zhu remained silent. There is no need to waste saliva on the obvious things. Gao Ming withdrew his gaze and said, "Brother, even if we can't catch up, then how can we find Master's reincarnation?" Looking at the direction they are going to the Shenzhou of Zhongtu. How can they find it? If they go to the north it's okay, it's nothing more than Beiju Luzhou, and if they go south they may at most be the continent or Tonggishao. At least there is still a sliver of hope. Now that this is going west, the sky is big and the earth is big, not just looking for a needle in a haystack. Wang's face was sad and he said in a deep voice, "Unless you are a fairy, you can barely catch up to that golden light. Besides, Master said that as long as you lose this fight you don't need to look for him. It is doomed to be in vain." Gao Ming continued, "Master also said that as long as he dies, you can restore your identity and real name. It's called Su Qingshan. It's a good name. Master asked me to tell you another word. You don't have to think about how to deal with it anyway. Take revenge, and when you walk on the road and see that surname Qin, remember to kowtow to him a few times, and take it as a thank you for your kindness and your revenge." The woman was silent, her eyes were complicated and her face was pale. Ma Kexuan left Qin Pingon with 3 puzzles. Just let Qin Pingon be careful and careful. The answer lies in these 3 people. Ma Kexuan not only kept them secret, but also told them that if one day they want to go to Luoba Mountain to join Qin Pingon, or if Qin Pingon finds them one day, they can tell the answer to the mystery. As for whether it is a stepping stone or to save their lives' characters, it doesn't matter what they choose, they are all free. The answer to the riddle is the names of 3 people. Like Ma Kexuan, these 3 people are all from the younger generation of Lizhu Cave. For example, the person Gao Ming knows is Lu Jingchun. It seems to be a descendant of the Lu family on Fulu Street, who is now living in the Su family in Qingfeng City. In the city god's temple in the capital of the Yushuan Kingdom, 2 outsiders came. They clearly came across the continent from the mountains and rivers, but they could not alarm the local city god. If I have to use an analogy to describe the scene of these 2 people visiting this place, it is probably that the emperor and Lord Xianxia in the play went to the local county government for a private visit together. A short man with a dark face and a bearded man with a face like a crown jade. The former was not as tall as Pei Qian, dressed in black with a white jade belt wrapped around his waist, and the man held the belt with both hands. It's a pity that the graceful and bearded man next to him is at least a head taller than him. Although Pei Qian was surprised, he still smiled brightly naturally. He used the method of gathering voices to form a line, and cupped his hands and said, "Pei Qian has met Zhou Qinghuang, General Fan." The little man nodded. "General Fan is on duty. He needs to tour the city gods of various continents during the day. I have nothing to do, so I can follow him for a stroll." The bearded man smiled and said, "Little nerd, we meet again." Pei Qian grinned. "I remember Master's husband who once praised Zhou Qinghuang, who was the first city in the world, in person. I've never seen such a short figure, but such a tall figure, so majestic and majestic." Inexplicably, it became the enshrined name of Luopa Mountain. The old deaf boy named Longxing made a temporary detour and did not go directly to Li Huai. Faju helped Yu to use the blinding trick together to hide his whereabouts so as not to cause complications. From a bird's eye view of Yu Yujian, you can see that on the half of the city, there are many groups of monks from other places, scattered in different places to enjoy the scenery, clusters like flowers. In the high altitude where Sword Immortal's private residence was supposed to be, the old deaf boy couldn't help but look back at the top of the city. He thought that he would be stopped by the sages of the Confucian temple who lived here, and that he would need to report his identity and customs clearance. At least it was a cutscene. The old deaf boy had no grievances about it. After all, he had long been used to being a man with his tail between his legs in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, but unexpectedly he passed the city so smoothly, which instead made the old deaf boy feel a sense of guilt. Muttered, "The Confucian temple doesn't treat me like a dish?" But if he was really stopped, Gontang would probably complain a few more words. Even if the boss Sword Immortal is gone, there are still young hermits who have recently engraved characters. Ningyao has just entered the 14th realm, and there are still a few in the colorful world. As for Feishing City, does your Confucian temple really think that the Great Wall of Sword Chi doesn't exist anymore? Arriving at the ruins of the old city, the old deaf child sighed and fell to the ground first. He revisited the old place, saw the wounded things, paid homage to the ancient sites and thought deeply. Great monks naturally have the vision of big monks. The characters formulated by Li Xing for the human world are actually an invisible cage of heaven and earth for the remnants of ancient gods and spirits. As long as they appear in the human world, they need to face the thorns laid and created by these human characters. Scholars as well as the landscape gods of the later dynasties have little feeling for this. But the higher the realm of the ancient gods and the more refined the golden body, the greater the restrictions. People in the world walk on a mountain road full of thorns, and it is very easy for their clothes to be hooked and their skin to be punctured. Similarly, ancient gods appear from outside the world, just like walking on a thorny road of words. Every step they take will wear off their golden bodies. That's why Zhou Mi personally formulated a new language for the wild world, not only to help the Yaozu and Howren and the human race draw a clear line, but also to secretly attract the ancient gods hiding in the sky, paving the way. Yu Yu whispered. When Ning Yao and that senior met, they didn't seem to ask why Master was able to return to the Ascension realm. Gontang nodded and said indifferently, "Probably this is the courage of the 14th realm. Below the 14th it is all empty-headed things. Others' realms fluctuate, so there is nothing to talk about." Going back to the ashram by stealth and risk, Gontang is of course not just going back to have a look. Yu Yu asked, "What is Master doing here?" Gontang said, "I've heard people say a truth. The taste of my hometown is not the food but the drinks." Yu Yu guessed that the young hermit told the Master. After all, in the Sword Chi Great Wall, few people were willing to chat with their master. The former Sword Chi Great Wall roughly consisted of 3 lands: the main city, the Sword Fairy's private residence to the south of the main city, and the Mirage to the north, which is a bustling mountain market. Gontang stretched out his finger to the north. It used to be a good place where there was a lot of wind, flowers, snow, moon, gold and silver. There was a lot of fish and dragons, and the fairy money in your pocket was more useful than the monk's realm. Unlike the Great Wall of Sword Chi, much like Howren Xianxia, the most criticized part of the Sword Chi Great Wall is the arena created by this mirage. It is more cruel than Dili Mountain in Luzhou, Beiju. Every time 2 people go up, one must die before it is over. Half dead. Now, on the former site of the Mirage, there is a place that can barely be called the Xianxia Inn. The main business is accommodation and wine sales, and the sideline is selling some unpopular magic weapons on the mountain. With the help of the momentum of this inn, a street appeared. Those who can do business here must have a lot of backing. The old deaf children have to wonder if one of the masters behind the scenes is the private sword of a certain Jinchi Great Wall who returned from a long journey. The old deaf child is very familiar with the origin of this bazaar. There used to be more than 40 large and small buildings over there, with pavilions clustered in clusters, row upon row, high and low, layer upon layer, forming a tall building. In the past, when I came to the inverted mountain, I wanted to take a look at the Howren merchants and tourists at the top of the city. They were not very courageous, or they didn't like to go to the main city to deal with bad luck. They would go to this market for a few days, just to see. Some of the larger sects from the same continent have built guild halls in the Mirage, so that fellow Daoists from the same continent can have a place to stay. Gontang sighed and said, "Back then the market was very lively, lit like daylight, singing and singing every night. It was said that there were 3,000 large and small houses, shops selling all kinds of rare treasures and items of inauthentic origin, brothels, gambling stalls, restaurants that openly sell the secrets of Taoism, private houses and ashrams full of aura, and a large number of anonymous people, who are responsible for helping people point out the crux of practice, have gathered everything that Xianxia should have, and Xianxia should not there are, and there are, in short there are everything. Just talk about the mountain spirits who specialize in worshipping the moon and refining qi, and those who are proficient in the art of gathering yang and replenishing yin. Sleep with them and you can earn money. Money. Yu had a strange expression on his face. Old Gontang blushed and explained, "It's just what I heard. If Yu hadn't worshipped Gontang as his teacher, he would have migrated to the colorful world with that giant city. There are many types of paths for great monks to practice and proclaim, such as daylight, turning into a rainbow, riding a dragon and riding a crane, lifting up in the rosy clouds, soaring into a purple cloud, dissecting a corpse, becoming a feather, etc. There are different paths and there are high and low ranks. For future generations, it is probably the most enviable to rise from the house. In several worlds, there are well-documented deeds in history, and the deeds of being able to drag their families and become immortals together. For thousands of years, there are only a handful of them. It's like the boss sword fairy just leaked one thing to Qin Pingon, the Summer Palace, the Cold Palace and the Mirage together. It is a three-mountain formation. Since it is called Sanshan, of course it is the handwriting of Mr. Sanshan Jiuho. And the Mirage among them is another flying platform carefully imitated by the Great Wall of Sword Qi, which took a very long time. The foundation of the Mirage was created by the hidden official before Shao Yun. It is a character with great talent but poor luck. His realm is too low to live long. The old deaf child had a good relationship with this person at the beginning. In the end, this Mirage became the tip of Qin Qingda's sword that cleared the way and lifted the city up. The patriarch Tueshan had anticipated this, but there was no need to stop Qin Qingdu from sacrificing this sword. After all, those who left were all young sword cultivators with very low realms, and even Ning Yao hadn't entered the Jade Roar realm at that time. If Man Huang wanted to exterminate them, he would have to pay a huge price. From Qin Qingdu to Qi Tingji Qin Shi to Lu Ji and Lao Defer etc., they all made different choices back then. What the barbaric world is looking for has never been this hard to gnaw great wall of sword Qi with little flesh. It has everything, but it does not have the word barren. In fact, if Qin Qing was willing to give way to the barbaric world back then, to the sword Qi Great Wall and the mountains and rivers of the two continents, so why not? Not enough. Then in the wild world I will give you the sword energy of the Great Wall, build the religion and give you everything you need for Qin Qingdu to be called the ancestor. The master and apprentice walked to the yellow mud street on foot, and the old deaf child picked a roadside wine shop with the best business. The shopkeeper was a plump woman with a mole on the corner of her mouth. Suiguan, wearing a calorie round-neck green gown, leaned against the counter with a relaxed attitude, holding a round fan. Her appearance was extremely gorgeous. The guy who serves food and wine in the shop is a young man with a low level but full of energy. According to the mountain, he has deep roots and a fairy seedling. The woman took one look at the rickety old man and two at the young Jianxiu. She didn't dare to be negligent and started yelling herself. The old deaf man asked for a jug of wine and some appetizers. The woman turned her head and looked at the inner door. Holding a curtain of yellow bamboo, he shouted a copper camel and reported the names of a few dishes to the kitchen in the backyard. The old deaf child picked a table by the street, picked a few points from his eyes, and there were some wooden signs on the wall next to him. Yu frowned slightly, feeling displeased after seeing this. How can this kind of nothing card be hung casually? The old deaf child didn't care if the wine shop used this kind of thing as a gimmick to attract customers. First drink and then food. The old deaf child poured the wine and drank at his own discretion, while the apprentice was depressed and didn't drink. The old deaf man took a sip of the so-called fructus liquor and sure enough, as the guy said, the wine was poured into the bowl, and there was a creaking sound as if there was a sound of breaking radish. As soon as Yu is free, he likes to ask this living almanac master about the past of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. During these years of traveling, he has been asking from 10,000 years ago to the last 300 years. The old deaf child sat cross-legged on the bench, using chopsticks to stir a plate of free cold jurgen. He felt that the taste was not enough, so he asked the proprietress for an extra plate of chili oil, poured it on top, picked up a chopstick and chewed slowly, took another sip of wine, and chatted with Yu with his heartfelt voice about something that seemed like yesterday. Ning Yao, Qi Shou, Pang Yuanji and their previous generations, the so-called younger generation of geniuses, gathered together 10 people, calling them geniuses is actually quite reluctant. This generation is a typical young year with a bad harvest. It is incomparable with their previous generation. If you compare it with Ning Yao's generation, it will be even worse. Among them, the most favored person at the top of the list, Mi Quan with the best aptitude, was recognized as a premature genius. It is said that he was a golden core swordsman at the age of 20, but unfortunately he died soon after leaving the city. This kind of thing has never been a special case in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, but a common practice. The 7 people, including Mi Quan, all died early. The remaining 3, Wang Zongping, who was originally the lowest in aptitude, was a bit of a late bloomer. He entered the Yuanying realm step by step, but in a battle he injured the Dao. Infant realm, probably a blessing in disguise, has become an old Yuanying in Feishing City under the colorful world. Although he has never been to a certain wine shop, he is now the sword cultivator most respected by young hermits. For the other 2, life experiences can be described as different. Su Yong's aptitude for sword practice is second only to Mi Quan, but he is afraid of death. In fact, it can't be said that he is afraid of death. He just refuses to fight with his life every time. He always wants to wait until he reaches the Jade Realm, and then find a Fairy Realm monster clan. Let's have a quick and easy change of life. This kind of business is more profitable. Unexpectedly, in the end, a closed-door retreat that seemed to have the right time, place and people, caused a pill room to be shattered and fell directly. Not only did it not being able to become the Jade Realm in one fell swoop, but reduced to a tattered golden core with a shattered sword heart. This is a big joke in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Instead of being injured on the battlefield and falling into the realm, on the contrary, the retreat did not break through the realm and the retreat came out. There is no more despised sword cultivator than this. Hearing this, Yu nodded and said, I often saw Su Yong when I was young. Although he had already fasted the grains, he could stop the fireworks in the world long ago with a diet of whole grains. But Yu waited until those few dishes were brought to the table. He still asked the waiter for 2 bowls of rice. Those who eat qi are immortals, but those who do not eat are gods. Some qi practitioners would often feel nauseated and vomit when they smelled the smell of fire and food during the period of breaking the valley and convincing their qi. The monks of genealogy are okay. The sect has its own celestial medicine and panacea preparations, and Shanzai Shioka suffered. The old deaf man shook his wine bowl. That Su Yong, a drunkard and addicted to gambling, also likes to visit brothels, owes money all year round and refuses to repay it, reneging on debts to avoid debts. I travel between the city and the Mirage here all the year round, doing some low-end business, running errands for people, earning some price difference and so on. Whoever is willing to invite him to drink old wine is his uncle. To say that a sword cultivator who has fallen from Yuanying to Jindan is still a land sword fairy that cannot be underestimated in other places. There may be criticism behind his back, but he will definitely not be sarcastic in person. Unfortunately, Su Yong is in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Later, I became someone's follower and the ghost life got a little better. Who is someone? Who else could it be? That person once persuaded Su Yong to go to Xianxia. He believed that the reason was nothing more than moving the dead and living people. The Jindan sword cultivator in Xianxia is still very popular. Can be seen that Su Yong was really tempted, otherwise I wouldn't just go to the gate from time to time, but I didn't go there in the end. Since he is Jindan, he went to Wuxia Tianxia with him? No. When Yu heard this answer, she knew that there was no need to ask about the ending and she began to bow her head. The old deaf son continued. Su Yong shaved his beard, put on clean clothes, sneaked to the battlefield, picked up a standard long sword produced in the sword workshop and killed some wild people. A Golden Core's military exploits were attacked and assassinated by a monster monk passing by the battlefield. After all, it is still a loss-making business. As for Wang Wei, a sword cultivator in the Jade Roar realm, he joined hands with his Taoist companion on the battlefield and disappeared mysteriously together. When this person was in the Golden Core realm, he became an enshrinement to the Qi family. Later, when he joined Yupu, he could open a mansion by himself as usual, and married a woman with a common surname who was born in Yuhu Street. About 50 years ago, 90-year-old Wang Wei successfully entered the upper 5 realms. If it is understandable to say that Su Yong is a broken kin, then Wang Wei, who likes to drink the most and flatters everyone, is a bit contemptuous. Yu tentatively asked, "Then Wang Wei joined the Wild Monster clan?" The old deaf child said casually, "That's what they said. They went to Xiao Yin and Luoshan secretly, but I didn't see it with my own eyes, so I can't say what it must be. Yu asked. Master doesn't seem to want to go to Luapa Mountain as an offering? The old deaf child raised his wine bowl, took a sip of the wine and answered irrelevant questions. This man, as soon as he wants to be free, he will immediately become unfree. In the past he was in charge of the prison at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, and the old man felt very at ease. He could always find some fun to relieve his boredom, and he didn't feel bored. Now that I am out of trouble, it seems that the sky is high and the earth is far away and my own level is not low, but I always feel that I am hitting a wall everywhere and I am too restrained. The old deaf boy drank a big mouthful of wine, shrugged his shoulders, hiccuped and said with a smile, "You just want to be happy, kid. Don't worry about master's complaints." Children celebrate the new year happily, always thinking about new clothes and lucky money. Adults will inevitably be obsessed with extra expenses, or owed money to pay back the money during the new year. At this moment, a new guest came from the door with a green shirt and a long coat and a wine pot hanging from his back. He laughed with his master and apprentice in his heartfelt voice. "Fellow Daoist Longxing, you are down and out just because you don't want to bend down. Xian, are you just hiding here and drinking too much?" The old deaf child smiled awkwardly. "Listen, what I said hurt my feelings." Yu looked excited. The man stretched out his hand and pressed a few times to let Yu sit down. He looked up at the "No Things" sign on the wall of the wine shop, smiled and sat next to Yu, waiting for him to take the book for the wine bowl belonging to Yu. The old deaf child had already raised his buttocks, stretched out his hand, and hastily filled the bowl of wine for Mr. Guan. Qin Ping picked up the bowl, bumped it lightly against the old deaf child's wine bowl, took another sip of wine, asked the price and learned that a pot of liquor would cost 3 snowflakes. "Is it?" There is no need to greet customers in the shop for the time being. The young man is standing beside the proprietress. He is unhappy when he hears this, but the woman pats his arm lightly to signal him not to be impulsive. She was radiant, staring at the slender man in his 30s. His long eyes seemed to have golden threads flowing. The vision was extremely subtle, like a dragon swimming in a big lake. She obviously used her concealed hope's supernatural powers. Although she couldn't see the other party's cultivation roots clearly, she knew that the wine table next to the door had more history than the other. Especially the blue-clothed swordsman's appearance was the most impressive. Not small compared to the people in the green sarongs of the Xianxia dynasty who are destined to be either prime ministers or bachelors, they have several more blue, purple and red Taoism. The general situation is general, but the depth of those few strands of Dao Qi cannot be discerned. If the master came here in person, perhaps he would be able to see more ways. The old deaf child asked in his heart, "Master Guan, do you need me to remind her that she violated the taboo on the mountain?" Qin Ping shook his head and said, "No need." The old deaf child wondered, "Why didn't Guan stay with Ning girl?" Qin Ping said with a smile, "Don't talk about this, I will return to Aquarius Island soon." I never thought that the woman would carry a jug of wine, walked around the counter, approached the table and stood by the table. "May I take a seat?" The old deaf boy glanced at Qin Pingon, but Qin Pingon turned a blind eye to her and even turned a deaf ear to her, so the old deaf boy waved his hands and said, "It's inconvenient, shopkeeper." She looked calm and did not leave. Instead she began to introduce herself. "My surname is Wei and my name is Yudian. I am from the Xianxia Sword School in Zhujiang and I was born in the Partridge Palace. I named myself Sherman because I was worried that the 3 distinguished guests would suspect that I had a heart." Unpredictable. As soon as this remark came out, there were whispers in the shop. Obviously he is no stranger to the Xianxia Sword School. The young man raised his eyebrows, his expression quite complacent. Following the master here to hide his name and open a shop to sell alcohol, the young man has already suffered from a belly full of uselessness. Today I can finally show my teacher's name openly. The old deaf boy didn't talk to him. Yu has long been resentful towards this shop, even pretending to be deaf and dumb. Qin Pingon asked with a smile, "Forgive me for my ignorance, but do you dare to ask where is your friend from?" Yu suppressed a laugh. The female cultivator who claimed to be Wei Yudian looked slightly stagnant, but still explained with a good face and a good tone. "It is located in Luxiazu and Tianyudong Tian is a close neighbor with a 1,000-year friendship." She really didn't believe that this person had never heard of her own Zhujiang Xianxia sword sect. Although the other party pretended to be stupid, she would not become angry from embarrassment. The leaders on the mountain in Luxiazu mainly have one prominent and one hidden. The former is Jinghao from the Ascension realm of Qinggong Mountain, and the latter is the couple in Tianyudong Tian. The Xianxia sword sect is not comparable to these two forces on the mountain, and it is also considered a first-class sect in Luxiazu, otherwise she would not have deliberately said the word family friend. The orthodoxy of the Xianxia sword school mainly includes Lishan, Chuanfu and Qingyang 3 lines, and the Partridge Palace is the core of the Chuanfu line. Hua Furong, the former lord of the Partridge Palace, was the founder and first headmaster of the Xianxia sword sect. She is a great sword fairy with a reputation of several continents, and she has passed down 3 sword veins. It is said that he has practiced Taoism for 3,000 years, and went to immortality after being weary of the world, and went away after being hydrolyzed. And Hua Furong is Wei Yudian's preaching mentor. Wang Hujing, the contemporary head of the Xianxia sword sect, is a sword fairy in the Yupu realm. In terms of seniority, he still needs to call Wei Yudian a master uncle. The ancestors were rich, the family was strong, and now the family has never declined and there is no sign of decline, but the momentum is not as good as when it was at its peak. Such a school on the mountain, wherever it goes it will be smooth. And there are at least one person like Wei Yudian on this street today. Her family is at the foot of the Luxiazu mountain. It is a rich and ancient existence. It belongs to the Daoist magnate. It claims to have 12 kinds of talismans and 24 kinds of talismans, which are relatively rare in Hauran Xianxia. In addition, the Wei family has a well-known tradition. Most of the women are beauties who are all over the country. Almost every generation has several women. They are either the queen of a certain country or the queen mother of a certain dynasty. And her direct disciple Wang Ku is that young buddy who is very destined to be a fairy. When he was born, a green paulownia tree suddenly grew in front of the door, and there were fairy ghosts singing songs. The reason for this trip down the mountain is because the master who is proficient in fortune-telling has a chance for the young man here. Sure enough, the sight of the mirage that had been dug 3 feet long ago, Wang Ku saw a ray of light in the night one day, and finally the boy got a dagger. As for the chef in charge of the spoon, whom she calls the copper camel, the old man has grown into a spirit among the thorn bushes, and he is the mountain guard of the Xianxia sword sect. Yu asked in his heart, "Master, have you heard of this Xianxia sword school?" The old deaf child thought for a while. A long time ago, it seems that there was indeed a little girl who had come to the Great Wall of Sword Qi and practiced for decades. She had good aptitude. There was no teacher, only family education. She formed the alchemy here, practiced swords at the top of the city, and got 1 or 2 inheritances of ancient sword veins. The little girl is not very good at drinking and she likes to swear when she drinks. She has a good relationship with Zhou Xian. After becoming a nascent soul, he was a tiger and he was gearing up all day long thinking about beheading a Yupu realm monster monk, but for some reason he was driven home by the boss sword Immortal. I heard that she returned home, very happy. She will soon establish a sect, and I guess she is the originator of the Xianxia sword sect. After that, intermittently, disciples and grandchildren come here to practice killing demons, and most of them are women. The last group of disciples seems to have no swordsman. This is normal. Hauran Tianxia sword cultivator Jingui. I don't dare to casually throw it to the sword Qi Great Wall. Yu nodded and said, "It sounds like a fairy mansion with a good family style." He looked at the fake "nothing happened" sign on the wall again, and he was a little pleasing to the eye. Qin Ping asked with a smile, "Senior Longxing?" The old deaf boy had no choice but to extend his hand and say, "Fellow Daoist Wei, it's a pleasure to meet you. We master and apprentice have admired your sect for a long time. Let's sit down and chat." Wei Yudian first asked his disciples to hang up a wooden sign that said they were closed. As soon as he heard that she was the owner of the Partridge Palace of the Xianxia sword sect, half of the customers in the wine shop began to propose a toast to her, so Wei Yudian had no choice but to greet each of them politely. The old deaf boy smiled as he watched her finish all these tasks, and when she sat down again he asked straight to the point, "What do fellow Daoist Wei want to talk to us about?" Wei Yudian said, "Let me take the liberty to ask, will the 3 distinguished guests continue to go south or go back?" The old deaf son said, "No accident, we are going to Hauran." Wei Yudian smiled and said, "Then I'll just say it straight without going around in circles. Can you invite fellow Taoists to visit our Xianxia sword sect?" The old deaf boy waved his hand and said, "I have already agreed to this. Yu Daoist Chen's invitation to be an offering." Wei Yudian suddenly realized, turned his head and asked, "May I ask where Qin Daoyu's fairyland is?" Qin Ping smiled and said, "Small place, Aquarius Island." Wei Yudian praised, "Although Dongbao Pingzhou is small, there are countless strange people." Qin Pingon nodded and said, "That's why we need to invite Senior Long Xing to my house in Shantao Town. I also hope that fellow Daoist Wei, a gentleman, will not take what others like and don't cut him halfway." Wei Yudian raised the wine bowl and drank it first. "How dare you?" The old deaf child had actually seen the fatigue of the young hermit official, and he couldn't imagine who could make him suffer such a serious injury now. At the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the old deaf child adheres to the tenet that more things are worse than less things, and he has always acted indifferently, so until now he has not asked the reason for this matter. So the old deaf child took the initiative to raise the wine bowl. "I will replace Qin Dao, you have a drink." Wei Yudian drank another bowl of wine and said with a wry smile, "It's not like our Liuxia Island where the grass doesn't grow under the pines and cypresses." Qin Ping smiled as if he didn't understand what she meant. The old deaf child was a little surprised. She had only drank half a caddy of wine, and she started telling the truth after drinking? Wei Yudian squeezed out a smiling face. "Master often said in the past that to practice swords, you have to go over the inverted mountain, and to learn immortals, you need to learn from heavenly immortals. Both swordsmanship and immortal techniques must point directly to the Tao." The old deaf child echoed, "I have insight." Exchanging glances with Mr. Yingguan. "When we arrive at Luoba Mountain in the future, we won't need this kind of wine table to socialize every day, right?" "Of course not, Luoba Mountain is very clean, just in case you don't think it's lively enough." Wei Yudian looked at the lush street outside the door and only heard her sigh with emotion for no reason. When the wind and the clouds meet, there will be fighting everywhere, fighting and turning, dragons and snakes rising from the land, and all the characters will be full of eagles at a time. The old deaf child looked at Qin Pingon again. What kind of medicine is she selling in this gourd? After all, he is a nascent soul realm swordsman who came from a sect. As for the three of us, are you so heartbroken? She smoothed her hair from her temples, and the breeze blew all the noodles and wine. There is a sea of people and it is difficult to go straight. The family's internal and external troubles and the sect's near and far worries made her, who has always had a clear heart, feel that her future is bleak. What's more, Wei Yudian also received a secret letter from the head of the sect, saying that someone is already on his way here. She is a nascent soul but not a sword cultivator. How can she get rid of the entanglement of a sword fairy in the Jade Realm who still holds righteousness and reason on the surface? To be honest, the master gave me my disciple Wang Ku, a prophecy totaling 18 characters. I couldn't figure it out when I went down the mountain, but now it is fulfilled. Wei Yudian stretched out his hand to ask Wang Ku to come and sit together, and spoke with everyone with his heart. "The purple book is passed on in the mirage. Carefully carry the short sword, kill first and then seal the title." Qin Pingon covered his sleeves with his hands, half asleep and half awake, squinting his eyes like dozing off. Wei Yudian said, "Before this, my disciple also got a chance. Wang Ku, don't worry about it and hide it on purpose. Tell the three seniors the truth." Wang Ku was obviously reluctant, but since the master had spoken, he had no choice but to take out a rusty bronze short sword from his sleeve. "I got this by accident in an abandoned monastery called Zhongrenguan. The dagger, the exact date cannot be tested, but two seal characters are engraved, namely Zhao and Su." Qin Pingon raised his eyelids and explained with a smile. "If there is no mistake, Zhao is the surname of the country and Su is the surname of the people. The Zhao dagger in the sleeve was bought from Mrs. Su." The young man is skeptical. Depressed like falling clouds, it's not possible that the Taoist cultivators in the vast world are so sincere and speak from the bottom of their hearts when they meet each other, right? The old deaf child could only ask in his heart, "Master Yingguan, you are so knowledgeable, why don't you tell me?" She puts her heart out like this, she almost thinks of me as an old ancestor. I'm so stupid. Qin Pingon said slowly. It is said that a new sect has been established in the territory of a certain dynasty next door to the family where Wei Yudian belongs. It is aggressive and wants to compete with the Xijian faction for the nominal third throne of Luxiazu. This rising star who has been in the mountain for less than 100 years has a good relationship with Qinggong Mountain and Tianyudongtian. The young suzerain has a complicated relationship with the Wei family, and the Xianxia sword sect is under great pressure. It is estimated that she saw her senior's profound Dao Qi, so she went to the doctor in a hurry. If she wanted to find an external force, it would be best if she had a relationship with the Great Wall of Sword Qi, so that the other party would not dare to act rashly. In her school there is a post of ceremonial officer named Guanzhi. Every festival Lishan, Qingyang and Chuanfu will have one or two people from each of the three Dao lines. Tianhuang noble and noble background and Tianyudong Tian young master Shu heatstroke. The two sides are close friends. For some reason he was once the youngest champion in the history of the Xianxia sword sect, and this person who had high hopes was given by the Zhuxian. The genealogy was removed and deported. I guess her head not only helped Wang Ku to make a fortune but also helped her to make a fortune. Coming here can escape marriage and take refuge. For example, if she calculates it early, she may meet an expert like Senior Longxing here, the old sword fairy who hides her secrets. The old deaf boy's eyes lit up suddenly, and he skipped the old sword fairy and not the sword fairy. Escaping marriage? Besides the country's hatred and the teacher's resentment, could it be that there is a story about the makeup? Qin Pingon stopped talking and didn't want to talk about this. After seeing the old deaf child, he chatted a few words and waited to return to the capital of Yushuan Kingdom on time. Of course, the old deaf child is not coveting the beauty of Wei Yudian at his age and state. Seeing the beauty of the world is not enough. What's more, Gontang has practiced Taoism in this life and he has a very low view of the love between men and women, so he doesn't like it at all. As for Wei Yudian's clumsy deception, the old deaf child could see through it at a glance. His appearance was indeed worthy of the word qingqing, and his figure was even more excellent. The thin part was unbelievably thin, and the fat part was expected to let her robe loosen and still trembling. It is obviously the beauty of the hibiscus coming out of the clear water, but it has a charming charm. Wei Yudian looked at the middle-aged man with an extremely official air and said bravely, "I don't take the liberty to ask the name of the sword Immortal taboo Immortal mansion." But she only saw the blue-clothed swordsman closing his eyes and resting his mind. Obviously he didn't want to get involved in the muddy water, and didn't want to get involved in her personal grievances. But the reason why she acted so impudently was because she caught a life-saving straw, because in the hexagram of the head of the sect, there is a sentence, "Stop when you meet a dragon, and you are happy when you meet a green." No matter how thick-skinned Wei Yudian was, he couldn't forcefully hold him back. After much deliberation he had to temporarily put aside his thoughts, bid farewell and walked back to the counter with his apprentice. The old deaf boy shook his sleeves, pinched his fingers and calculated in his head, and made up a hexagram temporarily. The sky is not beautiful and the beauty is too miserable. Therefore Qingqing people are not available now. But don't look at the old deaf boy in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. No one takes him seriously. He is actually quite knowledgeable. After all, in that prison he has to find something to do to spend his time. There was a lot of chatter in the wine shop, and after drinking too much, it was inevitable to mention the attack and defense battle at the top of the city. Some wondered why the boss swordsman was so good at swordsmanship, why he only handed him a sword. Some asked Chen Zai's whereabouts, and some admired Qi Tingji and Long Xiang. Those from Jianzhong even praised Lin Junbai, a sword cultivator outside the Summer Palace. But when someone mentioned the last hermit official who had been in the limelight for a while, disputes arose and there were praises and criticisms. The former said he could how about lettering on the top of the city? The latter said that his formation in the Summer Palace was very ordinary and not outstanding. Yu lowered his head and squinted his eyes, rubbing his index finger with his thumb habitually in the hand holding the chopsticks. The drinkers at 7 or 8 tables, the little 30th Qi trainer from various continents in Hauran, became interested as soon as they talked about the young hermit. Wei Yudian couldn't listen anymore and couldn't help but defend the young hermit who was far away in the sky. Everyone, it is easy to talk about the faults of the ancients after the ancients, but it is difficult to do the things of the ancients in the position of the ancients. The truth is this: not everything is clear to the onlookers. Don't say anything else, just say that he was able to invite the old sword fairy Qi, the criminal officer Haosu and the others rushed to Tuyue Mountain together, which shows that the old sword fairy chose him in his early years. He was a hidden official and he did not choose the wrong person. The old deaf boy didn't pay much attention to these discussions, looked at the drowsy Qin Pingon and said in his heart, "Master Yingguan?" Qin Pingon opened his eyes and asked doubtfully, "Huh?" The old deaf child said cautiously, "Isn't it because I quarreled with Ning Yao?" It is reasonable to say that Qin Pingon never complained about others when he suffered in prison earlier, So there is no reason for him to go back to Howren Tianxia. Let's talk about being like a tiger with wings. Just say that in Aquarius continent who would dare to wrestle with Luoba Mountain. Even though Qin Pingon looked seriously injured, he shouldn't be so depressed. After much deliberation, the thing that can make Qin Pingon so depressed must be Ning Yao. No wonder Qin Pingon rushed over when Ning Yao appeared on Shirwan Dashan. Dare to be one running and one chasing? The young couple had a conflict. What about getting angry? Qin Pingon rubbed his forehead. What is it all about? The old deaf boy smiled and said, That's right, I must have misunderstood. How dare you quarrel with Ning Yao? Qin Ping said helplessly, Thank you for your understanding. The old deaf boy became more and more curious. What's going on? Qin Ping angrily said with a smile. I just got into a fight and just took a nap when I was sleepy, so I still need to report and explain to you? The old deaf child stopped talking. His temper was so strong he reckoned that he had quarreled with Ning Yao. Could it be that Ning Yao came to Howren quietly this time and accidentally bumped into Qin Pingon for something shady? Qin Pingon didn't care about the old deaf kid's guessing, so he raised his spirits and started chatting with Yu. Yu blushed, very reserved. On the street, a noble young man in white clothes and bare feet appeared, with disheveled hair, loose clothes and long sleeves, and a long sword on his waist. Keenly aware of the abnormally sharp sword fairy aura outside, Pu Nei Wei Yudian's face turned pale and colorless in an instant. The rest of the drinkers are not in a good enough state to perceive the presence of the young sovereign sword immortal of Wuxia. The free and unrestrained nobleman walked forward slowly and said with a smile in his heart, It's only natural to pay back the debt, Wei Yudian. Where can you escape? I owe you 100 years and I have to charge you a sum of interest first. It's better to hit another day. The sky is high and the land is wide. You and I are not as good as Yeha. Don't worry, with my swordsmanship I can separate the world and come at my fingertips. We can see people outside, but you don't have to worry about the spring. There was a girl in a sable hat with rosy cheeks swaggering from the other end of the street to the wine shop. Her eyes widened, and she looked at the poor wretch whose brain was flooded. You shouldn't say such things at this time. Otherwise, in broad daylight doing things like this is actually nothing. The young sword fairy narrowed his eyes and smiled. Huh? Could it be that you recognize me? Otherwise, you can't be the one who can hear my heart, right? The sable hat girl didn't know whether she was pretending to be stupid or was scared, so she was about to run into the wine shop quickly. The young sword fairy came to her side in one step, and was about to press the sable hat on her head with his hand. The girl muttered, Well, don't beat me. She slapped casually. The well-known sword Immortal instantly swimmed into the rainbow, slammed and fell heavily on the distant city wall. His body was limp. He slid to the ground and passed out. Wei Yudian took a deep breath, passed the ermine hat girl and came to the door of the restaurant. She raised her eyes and looked around like falling clouds. What about people? Xiego laughed and said, The Lord of the Mountain is also there. What a coincidence. I was concentrating on retreat before. Lord of the Mountain, forgive me. The old deaf boy stood up quickly. This one in front of me is Bai Jing. That sword cultivator Bai Jing who liked to take other people's names in ancient times. Xiego patted Gontang's shoulder vigorously and said old-fashionedly, From now on when we go to the mountains, we will keep a low profile and work honestly. By the way, you are the general enshrined and I am the second enshrined. Every time the girl in the sable hat stretched out her hand to pat, the old deaf boy tilted his shoulders and forced a smile. Qin Ping counted the time, and it was almost time to return to Aquarius Island. He stood up and looked up at the wooden signs on the wall. The owner of the mountain was like this. Xiego and the old deaf son had no choice but to get up after taking their seats, gloomily glanced at the few men in the room. Yu and a man named Xianxia nodded and smiled, because this man was the only man who spoke well of the official Yin from the beginning to the end. The latter stepped in without knowing it but still smiled, and then he saw the man in the blue shirt with a sword on his back who was vaguely the leader and asked with a smile, Listen to the accent, is it from Beiju Luzhou? The Beiju Luzhou Jianxiu, who was sharing a table with others, nodded and said, Shanzhua Yeshio, this is my first time here. The blue-clothed swordsman smiled gently. Then can I treat you to a drink? Help settle the bill? The man smiled generously and said, It's kind of daring. The other party bid farewell, so Jianxiu had no choice but to stand up and return the salute with fists cupped. A chance meeting, no need to ask each other's names. The swordsman in green shirt turned and left, took out a few snowflakes and put them on the counter. He was the first to cross the threshold and leave the wine shop. The girl in the mink hat clasped the back of her head with both hands, followed closely behind with her shoulders shaking. With his hands behind his back, the old man bowed his head and followed. The queen of the young sword cultivator. The drinkers in the wine shop didn't take that group of people seriously either. 1 immortal, 2 ascensions and 1 golden pill. There are only 4 sword repairmen. The sword repairer who drank for nothing for no reason suddenly asked, "What do you think?" The man at the door stopped and turned his head, thinking for a while. "We can borrow that principle from shopkeeper Wei." Pause for a moment. The man said, "It is easy to talk about my faults after me, but it is difficult to do my things in my place." The wine shop was completely silent at first and then burst into laughter. Some people laughed endlessly. Someone said hesitantly, "Which onion are you?" The man smiled and said, "I am Qin Pingon." Sword of Coming Chapter 1098. Jianxia Great Wall used to be a place where it was easier to buy wine than fetch water. Today's noisy market is like a new book written after a dog's tale. But anyway, something is better than nothing. It's better than a dead silence, simply becoming a place where foreigners come here to pay homage to the past. Unlike the old deaf child who was full of worries and twists and turns, Xiago noticed Qin Pingan's strangeness at the moment, and she asked directly, "Shanu, why is the injury serious? The other party is capable. Do you need me to follow? Xiaomo help you get back the place." "Don't worry, Xiaomo and I, apart from swordsmanship, are also good at concealing aura and changing appearance. I also have a unique swordsmanship that can cut cause and effect." Lu Yan's hand shaking in the sky is too inferior, and the custodian teaches the other party to be proficient in fortune-telling and derivation, and it is impossible to follow the vine. If she was an immortal, she would have to hand out 2 swords whenever she had to, even if she was not worthy of becoming a Daoist partner with Xiaomo. She is still very sure about ordinary Ascension Realm cultivators such as Jing Hao and others. They are really like paper. Qin Lingjun's collection of passers-by, the first dozen or so pages she had already secretly flipped through. Unless it's the great celestial master of Longhu Mountain or the Huolong Daoist of Patafeng, such difficult 14th realm joint candidates. That's why she didn't dare to say it to death. She needs to call Xiaomo together and it will be safe well. Qin Ping stretched out his hand, patted the hilt of the sword lightly and said, "I just had a fight with someone and it was a narrow victory. The price was not small and the night tour in the sheath was cut off. You don't need to find the place, it's already gone." Refreshing. The old deaf child still understands some things in the world, and he already knows it in his heart just based on this conversation. Senior Baijing really doesn't think of himself as an outsider, and the young hermit also really doesn't think of her as an outsider. Xiago gave a thumbs up. Since ancient times, high talents have been tortured by the heavens, and those who can pass the test will accumulate Dao power. After this battle, the master of the mountain will surely practice like a broken bamboo, unimpeded, and go straight to the Ascension realm. When the old deaf boy heard the words, his heart was shocked and he gasped. Could it be that Luopa Mountain has the same atmosphere as the Summer Palace? I'm upright by nature but am not good at this kind of rhetoric. When I get to Luopa Mountain, don't I want to be out of gregariousness and I have to sit on the bench there. Since there was no trace of sword immortal Gao Yi for the time being, Wei Yudian courageously followed the group of people. He was close at hand but couldn't hear their conversation. Qin Pingon stopped, turned around and asked, "Is Wei Jianxian still doing something?" Wei Yudian blushed and said, "Young juniors dare not call themselves sword cultivators." It turned out that her identity as a sword repairer was quite embarrassing, because the origin of the flying sword was not correct, and the supernatural power of the flying sword was even weaker. Qin Pingon said, "I'm leaving this place soon. Please trouble fellow Daoist Wei to talk about something." Wei Yudian quickly explained, "Don't dare to hide it. I came here to take refuge, to be precise, to avoid the entanglement of Gao Yi, the sword fairy of the Qingwei sect." Qin Pingon said, "I guessed it, but this is a personal grievance between your 2 families and sections. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with me, right?" Taking a step back, according to the records of the Summer Palace, the last sword cultivator of the Xianxia sword sect rushed to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Nearly 200 years have passed since the experience of killing demons, and as for the other 2 batches of Qi fighters, they are not sword masters, and they don't have any record of combat achievements, so it is impossible for the hermit official Shao Xing of the previous generation to deliberately omit the combat achievements of your Xianxia sword sect. Wei Yudian blushed and said, "Our current head of the Xianxia sword sect." Qin Pingon cut off the conversation and said, "I know Ding Fei, whose Taoist name is Tongjun, has a sword of Jiangxin, and a flying sword of his life of receiving God. It is easy to count with plum blossoms, especially proficient in hexagrams when hearing the sound. There are many strange stories spread in the countryside of the Wuxia dynasty. It is a descendant of the ancient scorpion. It is said that it can curse and kill monks in the same land without seeing blood, and it can also save people invisible. People on the mountain are called ghosts, and they don't dare to provoke them easily. Apart from these superficial things, there are actually some inside stories which I know. I guess it must be the head of Ding who made a plan for you, asking you to come here and wait for the opportunity. Good luck and avoid bad luck? Or is it a long-awaited prediction that fellow Daoist Longxing will act righteously?" The old deaf boy waved his hands again and again. "I don't have the power to do so, so I dare not take matters into my own hands." Wei Yudian took out a kit from his sleeve, plucked up his courage, handed it to the young hermit who had heard his name for a long time and was fascinated by it, and kept reminding himself to speak faster, and hurriedly explained, "This time I am going down the mountain. Yuanyu the headmaster gave me 3 kits in total. One time I was asked to choose an auspicious day here to open a shop and sell wine. There was a commandment on the Fenglei note, stop when you meet a dragon and be happy when you meet a green. Once it was asked his disciple Wang Ku to travel at night one day, and Wang Ku got the chance to combine 2 swords. In the end the master asked me to open the kit only when I met the dragon and met the green, but repeatedly told me not to read the text content just face to face. Just hand it over to any one of Long or Qing." Qin Pingon took the kit, took out the note, took a look at it, put it back in the kit, handed it back to Wei Yudian and said with a slightly relaxed expression, "You can rest assured to do business here from now on. If you travel to Luxiazu, you will visit Xianxia sword sect and Fenzhou Weisher. As for when Daoist Wei will be able to return to Luxiazu, we will wait for the letter from Master Ding to inform you." Xiago asked with his heart, "Shanyu, what's going on?" Qin Ping said helplessly, "Hua Furong, the founder of the Xianxia sword sect, is also the master of Wei Yudian. She has visited the Great Wall of Sword Qi for the 2nd time. She has a good relationship with the Ning Mansion and is a frequent visitor." Xiago suddenly realized, if I had known that there was such a relationship, I wouldn't have knocked out that sword fairy or the master. Qin Pingon asked, "May I ask a question? Why is fellow Daoist Wei not a sword cultivator?" Wei Shi, Shangmiao Village, Fenzhou, Luxiazu, is a Taoist family with a long history and one of the 6 great altars in the world. The famous Taifu Temple is the family temple of Wei Yudian. There are 365 colorful hanging sculptures in the Taoist temple, which are unique. Wei Yudian carefully collected the kit, feeling relieved. When she heard the question, she replied with a respectful expression, "The latter is not the embryo of a congenital sword fairy. One of the relics is a flying sword. It has been passed down from generation to generation. I got the initiative to recognize the owner of this flying sword when I was young by chance. The ancestor is temporarily named Zhou Xian. After I was lucky enough to practice it for more than 100 years, I have only found out one kind of natal supernatural power, which is to imitate the natal flying sword of other sword cultivators, but it can only support a stick of incense time. When the time comes, it will immediately return to its original state. Therefore it is true that when it is weak, but it is not necessarily true when it is strong." Xiago grinned, "Such a fun natal flying sword. The ancient sword fairy must have been very motivated to refine it before he solved it." Qin Pingon thought for a while and asked, "Did Master Ding not give any hexagrams about this hard-won natal flying sword?" Wei Yudian hesitated for a moment and said, "Every time the master does a fortune-telling, he has to compromise his morality, which consumes a lot of energy. Even so, the master still made a hexagram for me, but the language of the hexagram is relatively general and there is only one sentence. Again and again and 3. The head of the sect is a fortune-teller, and there has always been an ancestor's precept that cannot be explained separately." Qin Pingon thought for a moment and said, "I have a suggestion. Let your family or the Xianxia sword sect help you find a flying sword. Whether it costs a lot of money or human favor, you try to use the sword refining the sword." Wei Yudian was puzzled. What is refining a sword with a sword and what is the reason for it? Xiago nodded vigorously. "Our mountain master is really smart. Even she and Xiaomao can't compare." Qin Pingon had no choice but to patiently explain. "Maybe this flying sword should not be named Xiaoyan. and it is more appropriate to change it to a name similar to Jiuduo. The so-called 3-by-head ding may mean that this flying sword is the sword can occupy the magpie's nest and the 3 flying swords, and there is a chance to have the natal supernatural power of the 3 flying swords at the same time. This can also explain why the ancient sword fairy who sat on the sea and retreated to death, when he passed away, he would rather use with great perseverance and great painstaking efforts to strip it out. He is unwilling to fuse it with his own soul and add a sense of immortality to the afterlife. The reason is that he is very conceited and valued this natal flying sword. Once it is smelted into nothingness, even if he still has the next life to continue the fairy fate, he can open his mind to remember his previous life, and climb the mountain to practice again, but the world is doomed to have no such special and magical flying sword. Wei Yudian's expression of joy was beyond words. She didn't know how to thank the young hermit for a while. It can't be the kind of incomparably vulgar promise among gifted scholars and beautiful ladies. Even if she was willing to do so, he still despises himself. The old deaf child nodded slightly. He was close to the truth. The gloomy look is as usual, and there is no trace of turmoil in his mood. Whether he was a sword cultivator back then or not, his level now is high or low, and the hidden officials are all the hidden officials. Qin Pingon reminded. Since there are some things on the mountain that are unusual, if you get a predestined relationship, you will suffer a catastrophe. Wei Yudian hurriedly stabilized his Dao heart. Qin Pingon said, as for how to collect debts and how to appear in front of you, it depends on your fate with that person. For example. After waiting for a while, seeing that the young hermit did not continue, Wei Yudian could only ask, for example? Seeing that she was still not enlightened, Qin Ping had no choice but to settle for the next best thing and explain to her. For example, the reincarnation of the ancient sword fairy is Gao Yi, who seems to be entangled with you in everything. For example, it is not Gao Yi, but someone else. When you refine the first extra flying sword, he may come to you. What will you do then? Wei Yudian was very upset. Qin Ping said slowly, this kind of causal cycle, collecting debts and repaying debts and avoiding them, is useless. Practice in the mountains, walk outside the mountains. There is a way to go up and down the mountain, which is the Tao, and life and human relationship are in line with the laws of heaven, which is the law. Together, it is the practice of Taoism. Wei Yudian stopped in his tracks and solemnly acted as a salute. Keep it in mind and follow the instructions. Xiego started to ask about general offerings again. Fellow Daoist Longxing, do you understand me? The old deaf child wanted to say such a profound and simple truth. There is nothing he could not understand, but due to the power of the ancient white scene, the old deaf child changed his words. I don't understand, I just think makes sense. Xiego patted the old deaf boy's shoulder and said with pity in his eyes, I'm not very enlightened, no wonder I fell. Qin Ping asked about the ins and outs of her relationship with Gao Yi, and after getting a rough idea, he said, leave it alone. Although Wei Yudian really wanted to chat a few more words, but he had already issued an order to evict the guest, so she had no choice but to leave, and suddenly remembered something and asked, that Gao Yi? Qin Ping smiled and said, probably because he was scared off by Senior Longxing. The old deaf child felt helpless. When Wei Yudian walked to the door of her wine shop, she couldn't help but look back. For no reason, she thought of a poem that Master often copied and recited, but now it is like a torrent suddenly producing dust. Ancient friendship is like real gold, which cannot be recovered after 100 refinements. This young hermit official indeed has the spirit of a knight-errant in ancient times. There was still about half a stick of incense to spare, and when he came to the base of the city wall, Qin Pingon looked at the land sword Immortal, who was about to fall apart, and he hadn't shown any signs of sobriety until now. Persuading a fight means just letting a young suzerain hang out like this. A Yupujing who is less than 2 years old is still a sword cultivator, and he founded a sect at such a young age, not to mention Luxiazu, but looking at the entire Howren world, he is a remarkable figure. Xiego asked curiously, why don't you call Wei Yudian and have a drum to gong with this sword fairy who is lying on the ground sound asleep? Qin Pingon said, assuming that Gao Yi is really a debt collector of Wei Yudian. With us by his side, Wei Yudian's Dao heart is deep, and it is inevitable that he will have no fear. When the manpower is not exhausted, the monks cannot rely on external forces to escape. Hinder. The old deaf child nodded and said, that's the truth. Qin Pingon asked with a smile, such a heavy hand? Xiego laughed, I'm saving his life. The old deaf child still nodded in agreement. Senior Bai Jing's words were true. If it was Qi Tingji who was young, he also heard those words, so it is estimated that this guy is already on his way. Xiago glanced sideways at the old deaf child, and began to give orders to the general priests as the second priest. Wake him up. On Luopa Mountain, realm is useless, so it was hard to catch a monster monk who entered Luopa Mountain later than her, and he was used to being a punching bag, so why not squeeze him? The old deaf boy has no brains, so how can he do it? Qin Pingon said, wake him up, hurry up and have a chat. I'm going back to Aquarius Island soon. Only then did the old deaf boy make a move, squatted down, stretched out his hands to hold the fellow's shoulders, and shook a few times, allowing the young sword fairy's soul, muscles and energy to return to their original positions. Seeing that, Gao Yi woke up. Qin Pingon said, your personal grievances with Wei Yudian, I have heard a rough idea. The dynasty where Webster belongs is indeed immoral. You shouldn't break the contract. You came here alone, found Wei Yudian and wanted to. There is no problem in asking for the principal and interest back. I am not interested in this kind of love and hatred. The reason why Xiego did something to you is because you shouldn't say nasty words here. Gao Yi leaned his back against the wall, raised his head and stared at the man in the green shirt who was in the middle, then looked at the girl in the mink hat out of the corner of his eye, and said with a sneer, good trick, I've learned it, dare you report your name. Xiego really wasn't used to this kind of fool who didn't understand the situation. He kicked over, the sole of his shoe stepped on the forehead of the young sword fairy, and the back of his head hit the wall, causing the opponent to faint again. The old deaf boy had no choice but to squat down again to wake up the young sword fairy. Gao Yi didn't dare to speak harshly anymore, he just lowered his head and stretched out his finger to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Qin Pingon continued, when Wei Yudian is here to open a shop and sell wine, don't bother her, but as long as she returns to Hauran Xianxia, you can sit on the sea and wait for a rabbit, or seek revenge and collect debts in Luxiazu, each according to his own ability. Do so at your own peril. Gao Yi folded his arms around his chest and remained silent. He is very much like the kind of arrogant young man in the marketplace. He loses even if he loses. Even if his head is split open and his mouth is full of blood, he still has to speak with his eyes. As long as you don't beat me to death today, I will sooner or later kill you one day. The old deaf child rubbed his chin. It's weird, he was slapped away by Senior Bai Jing before. Why is this kid still ignorant of the importance so he puts on his face with such arrogance? Isn't the most famous monk in Luxiazu the Jinghao of Qinggong Mountain and the master of Tianyu Cave Xu Nanyuan? The so-called mountain tops of Yizhou are not very high. Compared with the Hulong real person of Beiju Luzhou, Lu Jubao of Ia's Hao is far behind. Since this kid is not a direct disciple of Jinghao or Xu Nanyuan, is he an illegitimate child? Qin Pingon said, you can be unconvinced or you can be unconvinced orally, it's up to you. I'm just explaining a fact to you. After saying this, Qin Pingon shook his head, smiled to himself and said, it's time to find a chance to go to Zhenwu Mountain. Qin Ping glanced at Gao Yi. In this area north of the Shuan Dashan and south of the Old Mirage, my words are more effective than the Confucian Temple. Hearing this sentence, Gao Yi hesitated to speak but finally said nothing. Qin Ping turned around and left. Gao Yi grinned, stood up, stretched out his hand and rubbed his ribs. The pain made him wrinkle his face. That girl in the sable hat looked slender, her strength was astonishing. What realm? Could it be that she is a martial artist who has a good face and hides her secrets? In Hauran Tianxia, is there such a number one person? Jing Qian? That person is him? Xiego suddenly turned his head and raised his hand, so scared that Gao Yi leaned back and pressed against the wall. Qin Pingon counted the time and said, you go to your own business and we will meet again at Luopa Mountain later. I will ask you for your advice on the details of cultivation in the immortal realm. Xiego's face was indifferent. It was very simple for an immortal to break through and ascend, but she just wondered. It doesn't look like the mountain master's behavior style. Qin Ping said with a smile. Brother asked me to say a few crazy words while I was young. After trying it, I found that I didn't quite adapt to it. It was still awkward. I can avoid it in the future. Afterwards, Qin Pingon said, maybe I need to trouble you to keep an eye on this guy at least 10 days and a half months. Xiego knew it well and geared up his fists. The Lord of the Mountain suspects that he is a that man Huang has never used? Luxiazu now has a mediocre reputation, very mediocre. Overall, it is much worse than Fuyao Island and Jingjia Island, and only slightly better than Tongya Island. Qin Pingon nodded and said, "Don't forget, Gao Yi is a sword cultivator, not an ordinary qi practitioner who comes here to visit mountains and rivers and enrich the world. The Great Wall of Sword Qi is extraordinary to Howren sword cultivator. There are only two possibilities for a sword cultivator to say such things here. Either he is young, he is the suzerain and the sword fairy, he is full of ambition, he does not know the heights of the heavens and the earth, and he hates the Xianxia sword school so much he and the Wei family felt that they had endured the humiliation for nearly 100 years, and the revenge of the great revenge was in front of them, so they got carried away, lost their composure for a while and blurted out. Either it is Gao Yi who has long dismissed the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and there are two possibilities. One is that he has an excellent secret teacher and he is not able to deal with the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The Great Wall of Sword Qi, and who asked about the sword lost and suffered a great loss. There are many records of this kind of sword repair in the Summer Palace. Either Gao Yi is erased by the barren world which was used for internal strife in Wuxia. Of course the two possibilities can be combined to make more sense. Xiego exclaimed, "The Lord of the Mountain's eyes are like a torch and he knows what's going on." Qin Ping glanced at Xiego, who nodded. The old deaf boy said to his disciples from his heart, "Yu, when you reach Luopa Mountain, you can't rely on your master anymore. You may need to support yourself." Yu asked strangely, "Why did master say that?" The old deaf boy shook his head with a bitter face and didn't explain. Being a teacher doesn't match the ethos of Luopa Mountain. Gao Yi sat back on the ground and began to breathe and adjust his breath. The slap and kick of the girl in the sable hat caused the energy in his body to be overwhelmed, but luckily it didn't hurt Daoist's root. In the inner courtyard of the Tiangong, which is called the entrance and one aperture of Gao Yi's Taoism, there are 3 flowers blooming, which are suspended in the air in order of height and height. Unfortunately, there is still a long distance from the point where the spirit and spirit are mixed together, but in the tallest golden flower, there is actually opened up a real-like courtyard, with the gate facing the east far away. The sea of clouds is surging, the water is undulating, and there is a towering sacred tree, and there are red qi and green qiu entrenched on the tree, which is the avenue of Gao Yi's 2 natal flying swords manifestation, the sacred tree of the East China Sea branch that is soaring. In the Jinhua courtyard at this moment, it seems to be the scene of the moon in the middle of the night. When Gao Yi branched out a ray of consciousness and came to the main courtyard room here, the person who was leaning outdoors disappeared, and only heard the walking of people but not the human form. A series of subtle sounds of clogs stomping on the ground sounded outside the door. Gao Yi said, "He is Qin." Suddenly, there was a burst of spring thunder and tremors between the heaven and the earth, and the word "cautious words" echoed repeatedly. Gao Yi was shocked, but he still didn't say the other party's name. Gao Yi, who was disheveled and barefoot, walked to the threshold and said, "There are 2 worlds separated, why are you so cautious? Besides, you have said yourself that your identity is not shady, and you have made contributions to the world, so the Confucian temple will not if I don't restrain you. Even if Feng doesn't come to detain me, it's nothing more than losing my physical body, and I need to open up a mansion in my mind, build a dojo and maintain a little bit of immortality." Seeing that the other party still didn't intend to see him, Gao Yi continued to ask, "Who is that scholar surnamed Lu that you miss so much? Can you still be unable to part with it?" In an instant, Gao Yi lost all consciousness, as if he was imprisoned in a time-shifting cage. It was pitch black, only his thoughts still existed. Gao Yi had no choice but to have a thought in his heart, that he bowed his head and admitted his mistake with her, and instantly radiated light. This mind regained its freedom. According to the agreement, he did not dare to cross the threshold and enter the world that she turned into a forbidden area outside the door. Gao Yi sitting cross-legged, he said to himself, "It's you who said that there are still a few residual swordsmanship in this place and they still can't go away. It's my chance. Here I have the opportunity to return to Wuxia and help you win that pile of swordsmanship. Waiting for a great opportunity for thousands of years. The result is that I have not yet reached the top of the city, and I have suffered such a great humiliation. Back then you and I formed a contract to let you escape, and everyone said that the master humiliated the subject to death, so you just turned a blind eye? Now in Howren's world, chances are everywhere. Compared to when the 2 worlds of Howren and Wilderness opened up, there are more visions. Just talking about Wuxia, a remnant cave from ancient times appeared recently. It is said that Jinghao, the Taibao of the Qing Palace, traveled to other continents this time to secretly seek a strong arm to help stabilize Tianyudong Tian. The majestic leader of Yizhou Mountain did not hesitate to lower his social status to hook up with the monks on the top of Biezhou Mountain. It is obvious that Jinghao is bound to win this fight. A cool and melodious voice resounded. There are roughly 3 types of contracts formed in ancient times. We are not masters and servants. You and I are just masters and guests on an equal footing. In my opinion, your skin is a hut. I will help you. You came from an unknown royal family and you had this chance just 100 years ago. It was an opportunity that you never dared to think about before. As far as the cost of accommodation is concerned, I have already paid enough. Ask for more. Gao Yi propped his fists on his knees, his eyes were hot, he suddenly started yelling, "Every inn maidservant, sooner or later you will sleep." The other party was as usual, indifferent, and regarded his foul language and loud curses as nothing more than the singing of cicadas in the village. Gao Yi said, "You people who have attained the Tao, do you really have no emotions or desires? If it is said that the price of proving the Tao and ascending to the Immortals is the price, what is the meaning of immortality?" Probably because this sentence aroused the other party's desire to speak. A woman with a sword in a white dress appeared out of thin air outside the door. Her appearance was extremely cold and beautiful. She was a female ghost that Gao Yi met when he was traveling in Huangmao Mountain when he was young. Filling the void, there are 6 feet of golden body, presenting the appearance of heaven and man. The shape that appears is flawless and pure gold. I only know that her surname is Zheng and the specific level is unknown, but her swordsmanship is extremely high. Gao Yi was in danger and even died several times, and she helped him secretly. At the beginning of his cultivation, Gao Yi mistook her for an earth fairy ghost. When he became an earth fairy, he guessed that she might be a legendary ghost fairy in the Jade Realm. Now Gao Yi himself is the Jade Realm, then guessed that she was at least in the fairyland, and Gao Yi didn't know if he would become a fairy in the future. Would she still be in a higher realm than himself? She looked towards a certain direction in the void. Her expression was gloomy and she said, "There are 4 of them and 2 of them are in the same realm as me. But if I really want to make a move, I'm afraid I can only win against the young Jindan sword." Build. Gao Yi fell back on the ground. I don't know why, just looking at him has exhausted all my energy. I have never encountered such a strange thing in my life. She smiled and said, "Your life? Only a few years?" Gao Yi remained silent. She leaned against the door with her back to Gao Yi in the room. "Now that I know why he meddles in his own business, why do I avoid them?" Gao Yi said, "You said you once stopped in the Hanging Mountain." With a sad expression on her face she murmured, "Don't bring up the past again." After the patriarchs of the 3 religions dispersed, all kinds of gods, ghosts, and ancient immortals sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, breaking through the ground one after another. Successfully avoided the robbery, escaped from the robbery, waited for the opportunity, and finally the sky will clear after the rain and see the sky again. The ghost sword fairy surnamed Xing hiding in Gao Yi's mind is just one of them. She once had an agreement with an old person, no oath was required, it was just a gentleman's agreement. As a result, he missed the appointment. But to be precise, she missed the appointment first. It turned out that when he was in the Hanging Mountain, when the 2 parties said goodbye, he did remind her not to try to join the Tao. She had endured it for many years, but finally she couldn't bear it anymore. One falls short and one loses one's physical body. Presumably this is doomed. The change of heaven and earth is called a great calamity. In this calamity, everyone has his own calamity. Gao Yi said, "What should I say now?" She sighed quietly. "If you can get the approval of a certain sword vein here, I will help you fight for a chance to fight for the Tao. Wuxia, Jinghao and others, the corpses should give way." Gao Yi asked, "What about you?" She said, "When you have accumulated enough external skills, you will be able to rise from the house during the day, and then we will part ways. Regarding the Dongtian ruins, the foundation of enlightenment, as long as Qin Qinglu doesn't make a move, she actually has a good chance of winning. It's just that there is no need to tell Gao Yi about this kind of thing, lest he be arrogant and blindly entrust it to others, which will lead to bad things." At this moment, a single sword cut through the 2 heaven and earth restrictions in an instant. This sword light cut open from the outside to the inside, but opened the door from the inside to the outside. A man in a blue shirt with a sword on his back came out from that door and said mockingly, "You are no longer a hermit official, but you are going to work as a criminal officer." Qin Pingon finally understood why Li Xing asked him to come here. Is it to help Confucian Temple to remind her a few words, Not to cross the line in the future? The woman in the white dress with the sword on her back frowned slightly. Gao Yi was terrified and hurriedly got up. Beside Qin Pingon, there appeared an existence who had been hiding here for a long time without knowing it. She was a slender, attractive woman, and her appearance was not inferior to that woman in white skirt. Bai Jing's terrifying talent is not only in sword refining, but also in all aspects. Perverted and unreasonable. According to the old blind man, if it weren't for some kind of jealousy, she would have been able to join the Tao. In ancient times under the 14th realm, sword repairer Bai Jing was indeed more invincible than Xiao. Bai Jing smiled and said, "This girl, do you have a Taoist name? Let me hear it?" The woman in the white skirt looked indifferent and said nothing. Qin Pingon explained, "If my guess is correct, the senior in front of me is Jing Dan and she has no Taoist name. It is said that she learned swords from UNV as a teacher. Learn the Tao with sincerity, get its essence. Know the way of hand-to-hand combat, have both long and short, internally solid spirit, externally spread the weather and sword energy cuts the clouds." Jing Dan was slightly surprised, nodded and said, "Mr. Qin is absurd." Qin Pingon said, "Li Xing hopes that the seniors will not exceed the rules in the future." Jing Dan nodded and said, "The rights are here and the rules are here." Qin Pingon didn't say much. "Anyway, I have already helped to bring the message." Bai Jing grinned and said, "Listen, do you mean you will rebel if the little master is gone?" Jing Dan smiled and said, "It's up to seniors what they want to think. If it weren't for just a mind here without a physical body, Gao Yi would probably be sweating profusely." Qin Ping joked, "Gao Jianxian, are you nervous?" Gao Yi's face darkened. One wave of ups and downs and another wave of ups and downs. Someone stepped into this forbidden area, and it was still like entering a land without people. "Jing Dan, Baidi City is short of a guard, are you interested?" Jing Dan bowed his knees to the visitor and said without hesitation, "I would like to follow Mr. Jing to practice the Tao." Jing Juzhong nodded and said, "When Luxiazu is over and the debt is settled with Gao Yi, you will go to Baidi City to guard the gate." Gao Yi's mood was extremely complicated, but he just looked at the green shirt again. "The surname Qin, are you nervous?" Jing Juzhong asked with a smile. "Mr. Qin, do you want to visit Baidi City? Otherwise, when you pass Baizhong to Shenzhou in the future, Baidi City has already closed its doors. It is uncertain when it will reopen." Qin Pingon shook his head. "I have to go back to Aquarius Island." Jing Juzhong nodded and said, "Then there will be a period later." Before leaving, Jing Juzhong looked at Bai Jing with a smile. "Daoist Bai Jing, as long as you are willing to kill strangers, you can escape from calamity and join the Tao." Qin Pingon was expressionless. Bai Jing grinned and said, "When the old blind man was retreating, I thought of it. It's just that this kind of road to harmony is a bit inferior. What do you mean?" Jing Juzhong said, "It's a pity, since it was originally destined that Taoist couples can be beheaded, and there is nothing in the world that can't be beheaded. All the way to the world are broken swords. If there is no sword cultivator in the world, Bai Jing has a chance to be among the top 10. 5 realms." Bai Jing pursed his lips. Jing Juzhong smiled and said, "The road is inferior? Why should you deceive yourself? To show others the appearance of a girl in a sable hat is to first cut off one's own mind and then kill strangers. Road, ask for 15 more. Why do you regret it when things come to an end?" Bai Jing frowned, deeply aggrieved, hugged the back of his head with both hands, then raised his head high and looked into the distance. "This body doesn't worry about it. I am most afraid of seeing gentleness in case. Once you see it, you will be reluctant to part with it." Jing Juzhong nodded and said, "Such a Bai Jing is the Bai Jing. She deserves to be the female cultivator who first walked into the gate of heaven in the battle of ascension to heaven." Qin Ping was taken aback when he heard the words and turned to look at Bai Jing. The first woman to ascend to heaven? This was the first time he had heard of it. In the past, I only heard that in the battle of ascension to the sky, the first Taoist priest opened the way to climb the mountain, and the first male monk to enter the gate was the sword leader who was also one of the 10 heroes in ancient times. Bai Jing said indifferently, "From the first day of practicing swordsmanship and cultivating Taoism, I made an oath to myself that I will look at the earth from the sky as a human being who is not a god." Jing Juzhong said goodbye with a smile and left. No wonder Zhu Lian said to Xiao on the mountain, "Have you ever seen a girl who is more proud than Xiego?" Qin Ping was silent for a moment and said in his heart, "Xiego, does Xiao know about these past events?" Bai Jing has returned to normal. He laughed and said, I know, I have nothing to say to him. Qin Ping held back for a long time and couldn't help cursing. Damn it, Xiaomo is an idiot. Bai Jing complained, don't talk about Xiaomo like that. Qin Pingon was speechless. The next moment he had returned to Aquarius Continent and was in Yongjia County, the capital of Yushuan Kingdom. Probably pride is a high city head. The person you like walks on top of the city head with pride at your feet.